She showed up with a rifle case, a duffel bag, and no combat patches on her shoulder. The veterans didn't even bother learning her name. They called her the Mistake, a first deployment lieutenant handed the most unforgiving role on the team. Overwatch sniper for Iron Wolf, a unit that had buried 3 operators in 14 months. One sergeant laughed out loud when he saw her assignment sheet. Nobody corrected him, but somewhere in a frozen mountain range halfway across the world, a mercenary commander named Darius Volkov was already building the trap that would test every one of them, and only one person on that team was built to survive it. If you're new here, subscribe now. Drop your city in the comments. Let's see how far this story travels. The transport helicopter came in low and hard, rotors chopping against the thin mountain air like the aircraft was fighting the altitude instead of flying through it. First Lieutenant Maya Rhodes sat near the rear cargo door with her rifle case across her knees, watching the peaks slide past in the gray pre-dawn light. She hadn't slept, hadn't tried. The man seated across from her, a bearded logistics sergeant named Diaz who'd been at Camp Sentinel for 11 months, had offered her exactly one sentence since Bagram. "Mercer's going to have questions about your sheet." Maya had nodded once and gone back to watching the mountains. The case in her lap held a Pointing 338 Lapua Magnum bolt-action platform, a rifle she'd been shooting since she was 16 years old when her father had decided that if she was going to spend weekends at the range anyway, she might as well learn to do it right. Master Sergeant David Rhodes, retired, decorated, and relentlessly demanding, had not taught her to shoot for sport. He'd taught her to shoot the way a surgeon learns anatomy, not for performance, for understanding, wind drift, barometric pressure, the way a target's center mass shifts a fraction of a degree when they exhale. She had absorbed all of it the way other teenagers absorbed music lyrics, involuntarily, completely, permanently. Her father had been dead for 2 years. She still heard his voice every time she got behind the scope. The helicopter shuddered through a crosswind pocket and dropped hard before stabilizing. Diaz grabbed a ceiling strap without looking up from his boots. Maya's hand stayed flat on the rifle case. Camp Sentinel materialized out of the rock and shadow below. A fortified compound carved into the southern face of a mountain ridge in the Korvac Range, a stretch of Central Asian highlands so remote that the nearest paved road was a 4-hour drive on routes that weren't always safe. The camp had been a Soviet listening post in another era. The Americans had reinforced it, expanded it, wired it with satellite uplinks and backup generators, and then filled it with the kind of operators who tended to disappear from official personnel rosters. Iron Wolf wasn't a unit you found in a SOCOM org chart. It was a unit you got assigned to after someone senior decided your particular combination of skills was worth the legal ambiguity. Maya had been assigned 3 weeks ago. She still wasn't entirely sure why. The camp's landing pad was a flat section of rock with yellow-painted circles and a windsock that was thrashing sideways in the morning gusts. 2 men were waiting when the helicopter touched down, a warrant officer with a clipboard and a master sergeant who looked like he'd been carved out of the same granite as the mountains around him. The warrant officer took Diaz's paperwork without comment. The master sergeant looked at Maya's rifle case, then at Maya, then back at the rifle case, with an expression that communicated precisely nothing. "Rhodes," he said. "Yes, Sergeant." "Master Sergeant Kowalski, I run the range schedule and equipment allocation." He paused. "You'll need to zero your weapon before you're assigned anything operational." "Understood. Range opens at 0600. I'll be there at 0545. Something shifted almost imperceptibly in Kowalski's face. Not approval, not yet, but a slight recalibration, like a man adjusting an estimate. He turned and walked toward the compound without waiting for her. Maya followed, rifle case in hand, duffel over one shoulder, and did not look back at the helicopter. The common area of Camp Sentinel smelled like burned coffee, gun oil, and the particular staleness that accumulates in any space where men have lived at close quarters for too long. It was 0542 hours, and the room was already half full. 4 operators were running a card game at the far table. 2 more were studying a topographic map spread across a folding table near the communications station. A pair of sergeants she didn't know were having an argument near the coffee station about something she couldn't immediately identify. Mortar trajectory math, based on the fragments she caught. The card game stopped when she walked in. Not entirely. 2 of the players kept going, But the other two watched her cross the room in that particular way that isn't quite staring because the watcher makes just enough effort to appear casual. She'd experienced some version of this in every unit she'd ever trained with. It was never the same twice, but it was always recognizable. The moment when a new person is evaluated by a group that has already decided, without evidence, what category of person they belong to. She found an empty bunk in the section Kowalski had pointed out, stowed her duffel, and spent 12 minutes cleaning and inspecting her rifle by the light of a headlamp. Not because it needed it, because routine was armor. By the time she reached the range, the sun had not yet cleared the eastern peaks. The light was flat and silver and cold. She set up at the far station, established a reference target at 800 meters, ran 3 fouling shots through the barrel, and began the process of confirming 0. She didn't hear anyone approach. That's a hell of a platform for a lieutenant on her first deployment. She lowered the rifle and looked up. The man standing behind her was tall, late 30s, with close-cropped gray at his temples, and the kind of calm in his eyes that either meant he'd seen everything or felt nothing. He wore no rank insignia on his range kit, but she'd seen his photograph in the unit briefing file. Commander Ethan Mercer. "It was my father's," she said. "He modified the chassis. The stock length and cheek weld are built to my dimensions." Mercer crouched beside her position and studied the target through his own binoculars. 3 rounds, 1 ragged hole, just left of center. She'd already adjusted. "David Rhodes," he said. "Yes, sir." "I've seen his competition records." He stood, lowered the binoculars. "What I haven't seen is whether any of that transfers to a real environment, terrain that moves, targets that don't hold still, wind that doesn't read the same way it does at a measured range." "Neither have I," she said. He looked at her for a moment. "That's either honest or stupid." "Probably both." The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile, more like a flicker of acknowledgement. "Zero your rifle. Report to the operations center at 0900. There's a mission briefing." He walked away. She turned back to her scope. The next 3 rounds went through a single hole in the center of the target. The operations center was a hardened room at the center of the compound, walled with blast-rated materials and fitted with a bank of monitors, a satellite communications terminal, and a physical map table that still bore chalk marks from the previous mission cycle. Mercer was already there when Maya arrived, along with 5 other operators she was meeting for the first time in any formal context. She knew their files. Files didn't prepare you for rooms. Staff Sergeant Elena Voss, demolitions, compact and precise in the way that people who work with explosives tend to become. Sergeant First Class Tobias Crow Crawford, communications and signals intelligence, a long drink of water with quick eyes. Sergeant Marcus Webb, medic, with the particular steady-handed calm of someone who has worked on people who are actively dying. Specialist Danny Huang, a breacher who looked younger than his service record suggested. And Sergeant Cole Barrett, who was standing with his arms folded near the back wall, and who had been, Maya would later learn, the one who'd laughed when he'd seen her assignment sheet. Barrett was looking at her right now, the way you look at something you expect to become someone else's problem. Mercer brought up an overhead satellite image on the central monitor. It showed a high-altitude valley in the Korvac interior, a cluster of structures built against a cliff face on the eastern side. 12 hours ago, Signals Intelligence confirmed active communications traffic at this location. He tapped a building at the compound's northern edge. "We believe this is the current position of one Darius Volkov." He let the name sit for a moment. "Those of you who've been in this region longer than a month know why that name matters." Crawford spoke without looking up from his notes. "Volkov's been operating a mercenary logistics network that's been supplying equipment and personnel to 3 different militant factions in this range. He's been a ghost for 14 months. Until now," Mercer said. "We also have a secondary objective, which is the primary reason we're moving fast." He brought up a second image, a grainy photograph of a man in civilian clothing, face partially obscured. "Agency asset, deep cover, missing for 9 days. Last confirmed signal placed him in or near this compound. We don't know his condition." "And we're going after him with 6 people," Barrett said. Not a question. 7. Mercer didn't look at Barrett. He looked at Maya. "Iron Wolf will have Overwatch support." The room absorbed that. Maya watched it happen. The small recalibrations, the glances that weren't quite directed at her, the way Barrett's jaw tightened slightly, and then released. Overwatch from where? Webb asked. His voice was neutral, professional. He was looking at the topographic map. Overlook Alpha. Mercer pointed to a ridgeline northeast of the compound. 1,140 meters from the primary objective. There's a natural firing platform in the rock formation at the summit approach. It takes the compound's northern face, eastern approach road, and the extraction route. Crawford looked at the map, then at Maya. Not with hostility, with the particular focus of a man calculating the math of survival. That's a hell of a shot if anything goes wrong. It won't be a problem, Maya said. Barrett made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. She didn't look at him. The pre-mission prep consumed the rest of the day. Maya spent 4 hours on the range in increasingly degraded conditions. First with a steady crosswind, then with the wind shifted and gusting, then in the late afternoon when the thermal layers above the sun-warmed rock created the kind of chaotic air movement that turned ballistic calculations into argument. Kowalski ran the range clock and called the conditions. He didn't offer help. He didn't offer commentary. He just watched. At 1,700 hours, she ran a final series of 8 rounds at variable ranges, 600, 950, 1,100, and a single shot at 1,280 meters that she calculated against the day's full wind chart, breathing, and the knowledge that if she missed, she'd have to work out why. She didn't miss. Kowalski collected the paper targets without a word, but as she was breaking down her position, he stopped near the entrance to the rain shelter. Your father ran a competition stage at Fort Bragg in 2009, he said. I was in the observer group. Best adjusted long-range performance I'd ever seen. I know that stage, Maya said. He talked about it. Said it was the one time conditions were actually in his favor. Kowalski studied her for a moment. He give you much? Beyond the rifle. Everything he had. Kowalski nodded once, turned, and walked back toward the main compound. Maya packed her rifle and followed the last of the light toward the barracks. The mission briefed at 2100 hours. Volkov's compound had a guard rotation, 6 visible positions observed over 18 hours of satellite coverage, with a probable 2-man QRF positioned in a vehicle near the western gate. The agency asset, designated Linnet, was believed to be held in the northern structure based on electronic signal analysis. Iron Wolf would infiltrate via a ravine approach from the south, breach the northern structure, extract Linnet, and fall back to the extraction route where a helicopter would be waiting at a landing zone 2 kilometers west. Maya's role was simple on paper: keep the team alive long enough to reach the helicopter. At 22:30, she found herself sitting in the equipment bay running final checks on her gear, and Barrett appeared in the doorway. He stood there for a moment, apparently deciding something, then walked in and crouched beside his own kit bag across the aisle. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. You shot long-range competition, he said finally. It wasn't a question. Yes. That's not the same as... I know it's not the same, she said. I'm not going to tell you it is. Barrett looked at her. Whatever he'd prepared to say next seemed to lose its form. Then what are you going to tell me? He said. She stopped checking her ammunition and looked up at him directly. That I'm not going to freeze, that I'm not going to miss when it costs the team, and that when you're in that compound and something comes around a corner that shouldn't be there, you'll want someone on Overwatch who has already calculated the firing solution. She paused. That's what I'm going to tell you. Barrett said nothing for a moment. Then he stood, zipped his kit bag, and walked out of the bay. She went back to her ammunition count. They inserted at 0130 under a sky with no moon and no cloud cover, which meant no ambient light and no thermal masking, a trade-off Mercer had calculated carefully. The cold was a physical fact, not a discomfort. The Korvac range at altitude in early winter pushed temperatures to -18 by midnight, and the wind coming off the northern peaks carried an edge that cut through the base layers of a body before the outer shell even registered it. Maya separated from the team at the ravine's first fork, moving northeast toward the Overlook Alpha ridgeline, while Iron Wolf continued south toward the compound. She had a small radio clipped inside her collar with a bone conduction receiver behind her left ear. She could hear everything. When she needed to speak, she barely had to move her lips. The climb took 47 minutes. The terrain was loose shale over frozen rock, and twice she had to redirect around sections that would have been audible to anyone within 50 meters if she'd committed to crossing them. She moved slowly, slower than she wanted to. The cold was making her fingers stiff inside her gloves, and she stopped twice to run blood flow exercises before continuing. At the top of the ridge, she found the firing position exactly where the aerial imagery had placed it, a natural shelf of rock roughly 2 meters deep and 4 wide, angled slightly downward toward the compound below. She set up her bipod, unfolded the rifle, and took her first look through the scope. The compound appeared perfectly through the glass. Northern structure on the left side of her view, eastern approach road running diagonally down from the top right. Guard positions exactly where they'd been marked in the intelligence summary. She counted bodies. 6 visible, rotating on a pattern that ran approximately every 12 minutes. She checked the vehicle near the western gate. 1 man in the cab, running the engine to stay warm. She keyed her radio. Overwatch established. Overlook Alpha. 6 visible, pattern consistent with intel. Vehicle QRF is active, 1 occupant. Mercer's voice came back low and even. Copy. We're at the ravine exit. Hold for green. She settled into the position and let her breathing slow. The ground beneath her was frozen solid and bit through her clothing at every pressure point. She didn't shift. Shifting meant disturbing the position, and a disturbed position on a 1,100-meter shot meant a miss, and a miss meant a dead teammate. She accepted the cold as information, noted it, cataloged it, set it aside. 12 minutes passed. Then 20. She adjusted her wind calculation twice as the gusts changed pattern. Team is at the outer perimeter, Voss's voice said in her ear. Breach in 90 seconds. Maya put her eye back to the scope. The compound guard on the northern wall was halfway through his rotation, back to her. She exhaled slowly. And then every floodlight in the compound fired on simultaneously. 8 separate high-intensity lights that turned the darkness into flat white noon in under a second. And every shadow that had been hiding inside the compound began to move. Not 6 guards. She counted fast. 9, 12, 14. Movement on the rooftops. Movement at the eastern gate. Iron Wolf, abort, she started. But she could already hear the first burst of gunfire from below. The ambush had been waiting for them. And at the far eastern edge of the compound, she could see the thermal signature of a vehicle engine spinning up, not a car. A machine gun truck, accelerating toward the ravine exit, toward the only route Iron Wolf had to run. The truck was moving fast, headlights off, using the compound's floodlighting as cover. Maya tracked it through the scope, and her brain ran the calculation before she consciously decided to run it. Range 1,080 meters. Wind pushing left at 11 kilometers per hour, with a gusting variable she'd clocked at +4. Target moving laterally at approximately 30 kilometers per hour on a slight downhill grade. She was already adjusting her hold when Mercer's voice hit her ear. Contact multiple. We are taking fire from the north wall and the eastern rooftop. We cannot advance and we cannot fall back. Overwatch. What do you have? Machine gun truck moving east toward your exit route. 2 rooftop RPG positions, north side. 6 additional fighters entering from the eastern gate. She kept her voice flat. Information only. I have solutions on all of them. A half-second pause. Then work. She fired. The first shot took the RPG operator on the northern rooftop at the moment he raised the launcher to his shoulder. He dropped straight down, the launcher clattering off the roof edge and falling into the courtyard below. Maya was already cycling the bolt, already shifting, already breathing into the next solution. Second shot. The RPG gunner on the adjacent rooftop, 1,090 meters. Wind had shifted 2 degrees. She adjusted by instinct rather than calculation, and the round landed where she needed it to land. 2 shots, 2 targets, 4 seconds. Rooftop RPG threat is down, she said into the radio. She heard Crawford's voice, tight, moving, firing. Copy that, copy that. The truck was still coming. She swung back to it, tracked the cab, found the driver's position through the windshield, and she didn't take the shot. Something made her hold. She pulled back from the driver and found the front left wheel housing, calculated the angle against the road grade, and put a round through the engine block instead. The truck lurched hard left, engine seizing, and skidded off the dirt track into a drainage ditch where it stopped at an angle with the gun mount pointing at the sky. The gunner scrambled out the rear and immediately dropped flat, which meant he was smart and she'd have to find him again in a moment, but the vehicle was neutralized and the exit route was open. Truck is down, she reported. Exit route is clear. Driver's side. One dismounted gunner, prone, west edge of the ditch. Watch your left on the way out. We see him, Webb said. The firefight below her was condensing now. Iron Wolf moving fast and hard through the outer perimeter. The compound's defenders caught between the team's suppressive fire and whatever interior confusion the lights and noise had created. Maya tracked the courtyard, identified a fighter moving to flank Voss from behind a fuel tank, and put a round into the dirt 2 feet in front of him, close enough that he reversed direction, which was what she wanted, because shooting him in the back while he ran away wasn't information she needed to carry home. He ran straight into Barrett, who handled it efficiently. She tracked, watched, waited. The team reached the northern structure 7 minutes after the compound lights had blown. Mercer's voice came back steadier now, controlled, the particular tone of a commander who has processed the chaos and found his footing inside it. Overwatch, we are inside. Linnet's location is unconfirmed. Stand by. Standing by, Maya said. Compound perimeter is quiet on the east and north. I have 2 fighters at the western gate, staying put. They're not moving toward you. Copy. She watched the western gate. The 2 fighters stood close together, rifles up, neither advancing. She read them the way her father had taught her to read a range, by what the body was doing, not what the weapon was doing. Both the men had their weight back. One of them was on a radio. They weren't attacking. They were reporting. Something about that was wrong. She didn't know what yet. 6 minutes passed. Then Mercer's voice returned, and she heard something in it she hadn't heard from him yet. A controlled edge, a compression that meant what he was about to say was not what anyone wanted to hear. Linnet is not in the northern structure. We've cleared every room. There's evidence of recent occupation, food, personal items, restraint hardware, but the asset is not here. Maya said nothing and kept her eye to the scope. There's a secondary structure, Voss said, and Maya heard the sound of paper, a physical map being consulted. Southwest corner, the one we assessed as storage. That's 110 meters from your current position, Maya said. There's a covered walkway between the northern building and what looks like the main hall. 2 fighters moved through that walkway 12 minutes ago heading southwest. They haven't come back. Armed? Rifles. One had a sidearm visible. Mercer's voice, immediately. We move in 30 seconds. Overwatch. I need that walkway clear when we step out. It's clear right now, she said. But the 2 at the western gate are still on that radio. If they call interior fighters back toward the walkway. How long do we have? She watched the gate, watched the man with the radio. The conversation looked intense, short exchanges, the kind of back and forth that meant someone was either receiving or confirming instructions. Maybe 2 minutes, she said. Maybe less. Then we move now. She heard boots on hard floor through the radio, then the creak of a door, and she had her scope on the walkway before the first operator stepped into it. The covered section was partially open on the courtyard side. Slatted wood and corrugated metal, the kind of improvised construction that had probably been added in the last year. She could see partial silhouettes moving inside it. Nothing came at them from the courtyard. Nothing came from the interior. She kept breathing, kept watching, kept the western gate in her peripheral vision. The radio man at the gate lowered his handset. Both fighters at the gate began moving, not toward the walkway, but away from it, circling south along the compound's outer wall. She tracked them, tried to read the intent. South along the outer wall meant they were going around, not through, which meant, Iron Wolf, I have movement at your south, she said sharply. 2 fighters, outer wall, moving to flank. They're going to come around behind the secondary structure. Copy. Mercer's voice didn't change tempo. Webb, Barrett, south coverage. The team disappeared into the secondary structure. Maya held on the outer wall's southern edge, watching the 2 fighters move with a purpose that had shifted from defensive to something more directed. They weren't patrolling, they were positioning. She thought about the shot, calculated it. The angle was workable, 1,110 meters, the wall giving her a narrow margin on the approach, both figures moving in close enough proximity that she could service one and have a fast cycle on the second before he cleared the corner. She kept watching. And then the radio in her ear produced a sound she hadn't expected. Not Mercer's voice, not Crawford's, not any of Iron Wolf's operators. It was a new voice. Male, calm, speaking in accented but precise English. Iron Wolf Overwatch. I know your position. The transmission cut. Static. Maya did not move, did not pull back from the scope, did not look up at the ridgeline around her. Her heart rate had jumped. She noted it the way she noted wind data, as a variable to be managed, not surrendered to. She keyed her radio on the team frequency. Mercer. Someone just transmitted on our net, unknown voice, English, stated they know Overwatch position. A 2-second pause that felt longer. Say again. Unknown transmission on our frequency. Male voice, accented English, said, I know your position, and cut. Another pause. Can you verify your position is still secure? She ran her eyes across every angle above and beside her. The ridgeline to her north was rock and shadow. The approach below her was 40 meters of loose shale before the first viable cover, and nothing was moving on it. The position was exposed by definition. Any Overwatch position was. But there was no immediate threat she could identify. I'm clear for now, she said, but someone is monitoring our communications or was in a position to observe my approach. Understood. Complete the mission. Stay sharp. She went back to the scope. The two fighters had reached the southern corner of the secondary structure and stopped. They were waiting. Whatever they were waiting for hadn't arrived yet because neither of them was moving, and the body language, pressed against the wall, not looking around the corner, was the body language of men who had been told to hold until a signal. Inside the structure, she could hear through the radio the sounds of a room-clearing sequence. Short commands, movement, the metallic sound of a door being breached. Then Webb's voice, low and altered by something she identified a moment later as controlled relief. We have Linnet. He's ambulatory. He's got injuries, but he's moving. We need to go right now. Copy, Mercer said. Overwatch, we're coming out the north door in 40 seconds. I need the walkway and the courtyard clear. The two fighters at the south corner are still waiting, she said. They're going to have a line on your north door exit once you clear the walkway. 40-meter exposure window. Can you take them before we step out? She looked at the angle. The southern corner was partially masked by the structure's roofline from her elevation. She had a solution on one of them, the fighter standing slightly out from the wall, but the second was pressed deep into cover. I have one, she said. Not both. Half a second. Take the one you have. We'll handle the second on egress. She settled the crosshairs, breathed, noted the wind had dropped slightly in the last 30 seconds. The thermal shift that happened before dawn at altitude, when the air settled before it heated again. She adjusted 2 clicks. Fired. The fighter at the southern corner went down. His partner spun, brought his rifle up, looking for the direction the shot had come from, and Barrett came out of the secondary structure's south emergency exit, a door Maya hadn't known was there, and handled the second problem in close quarters before the man had identified a target. South is clear, Barrett said, breathing hard. Let's go. The team moved through the walkway in a stack, Linnet supported between Crawford and Webb. Maya tracked the courtyard, the rooftops, the approaches. Nothing moved toward them. The compound's surviving defenders had either gone to ground or were keeping a very cautious distance, and she understood now that some of them might have been told to do exactly that. Hold back. Let the team reach the exit. The voice on the radio had unsettled her in a way that the firefight hadn't. Firefights were chaos. This felt like something with a shape to it. Iron Wolf reached the outer perimeter wire and moved into the ravine. Overwatch, break position and move to extraction, Mercer said. Good work. She was already breaking down her setup. Rifle off the bipod, magazine out, action checked, case sealed. 38 seconds. She threw the strap over her shoulder and started moving north along the ridge toward the helicopter pickup point, moving fast despite the terrain and the cold and the weight on her back, because the voice on the radio was still sitting in the back of her skull like a splinter. I know your position, not we, not your team, not a general threat, your position. Which meant whoever had spoken knew there was a sniper on Overwatch, knew approximately where that sniper would be positioned, and had either calculated it from the terrain analysis or had been watching her from the moment she began her approach. She moved faster. The ridge was treacherous in the dark. She had her night vision monocular clipped to her helmet, but the shale was unpredictable, and twice she caught herself on a knee rather than a fall. The helicopter pickup was 18 minutes north along the ridge at a pace she couldn't quite sustain without risking an ankle, and she was 5 minutes into the movement when she heard it. A sound that wasn't wind. She stopped, went completely still, pressed herself against a rock face and killed the monocular's light. Below her, on the western slope of the ridge, movement, not animal, not random, deliberate upward movement, two figures at minimum, working the slope with the kind of controlled pace that meant they were trained. They weren't coming from the compound. They'd been pre-positioned, waiting on the ridgeline, waiting for exactly this moment, for Iron Wolf to complete the rescue and for the Overwatch sniper to break position and move to extraction. Maya was behind a rock, no bipod, no stable firing position, 1,100 meters from any support, and two trained fighters were climbing toward her in the dark. She understood the shape of it now. The ambush at the compound hadn't been designed to destroy Iron Wolf. It had been designed to push them through a rescue sequence that would force her off Overlook Alpha at a predictable time, moving in a predictable direction toward a predictable pickup point. The voice on the radio had not been a threat. It had been a confirmation. She unslung her rifle. The ridgeline above her narrowed to a 4-meter gap between two rock formations, a natural choke point that anyone approaching from below would have to pass through to reach the extraction route. She found a position behind the western formation, unsupported, rifle balanced across the top of the rock, and waited. The first figure came through the gap at a controlled jog. She let him pass. The second figure followed 8 seconds later. She was already moving, Bob. Not firing, moving. And when the first man turned at the sound of boots on rock behind him, she was inside his reach, and the engagement lasted 4 seconds and ended with her in control of the high ground and one rifle that wasn't hers lying on the shale below her. The second man ran. She didn't chase him. She keyed her radio, breathing hard now, voice steady by force of habit. Overwatch to Iron Wolf. I had a 2-man interdiction team on the extraction ridge. Pre-positioned, waiting for my break. One neutralized, one fled south. Someone had this entire sequence mapped out before we inserted. Mercer's response came back immediately. Are you clear? Clear. How far out are you? 13 minutes. We'll hold the bird. Move. She moved. But the voice was still with her, calm and accented and precise. And she knew with the particular certainty that came from standing in a trap that had been built specifically for her that Darius Volkov had not been trying to stop the mission tonight. He had been studying her. And somewhere below in the dark, a man who had just watched everything he'd predicted come true was noting what he'd learned and setting it aside. For next time. The helicopter was a Black Hawk running without navigation lights, and Maya heard it before she saw it. A low rhythmic thud cutting through the wind somewhere north of the ridge. She came over the final rock shelf at a controlled stumble, legs burning from the descent pace, rifle case banging against her spine with every step, and found Iron Wolf already at the pickup zone. Mercer was standing at the edge of the flat rock section, watching her come in. He didn't say anything. He just tracked her the last 30 meters with his eyes, and when she reached the group, he turned and signaled the helicopter. Linnett was on the ground between Crawford and Webb, sitting upright but breathing shallow. His left eye was swollen shut, and there was dried blood on his collar that had come from somewhere above his hairline. Webb had an IV line in his right arm already running, the bag taped to Crawford's shoulder rig to keep it elevated. He was conscious. His hands were shaking, not from cold. Barrett was looking at Maya. She didn't meet it immediately. She was checking her equipment, running the automatic post-mission inventory that her hands performed without instruction. Rifle secured, magazines counted, radio still live. When she finally looked up, Barrett held the look for a moment and then looked away, back toward the helicopter that was dropping into the pickup zone with its landing lights still dark. Nobody spoke on the flight back. The Black Hawk was loud enough to make conversation impractical, and the team had the particular collective silence of people who have just survived something and haven't yet decided what they think about it. Maya sat near the rear with her rifle case across her lap and watched the Korvac peaks pass beneath them in the pre-dawn dark. She ran the ridgeline sequence back through her mind. The two men on the slope, their pace and spacing, the way the first one had moved through the choke point, controlled but not cautious, which meant he'd expected the path to be clear, which meant he'd been watching the right place for the wrong signal. She'd broken her position faster than they'd anticipated. That was the only reason it had worked. She filed that information and let it sit. Camp Sentinel at 0430 hours, had the gutted, temporary quality of a place that had just exhaled. The night shift communications operator was at his station, running the mission debrief transcript. 2 support personnel were resetting the operations center for the next cycle. Webb took Lynette directly to the medical bay, and Crawford followed to assist with the assessment. Mercer held the remaining team in the operations center for a preliminary debrief that lasted 40 minutes and covered the ambush sequence, the guard count discrepancy, the radio transmission, and the pre-positioned interdiction team on the extraction ridge. He was methodical and unhurried. He asked each operator to give their account in sequence, and he listened without interrupting. When he got to Maya, she gave her account the same way she shot. In clean, measured increments, nothing wasted. When she described the transmission on the team net, the room changed temperature. "Someone was monitoring our encrypted frequency," Crawford said. He wasn't asking. He was processing it, working through the implications the way you work through a knot, systematically, following each thread. That's not a casual intercept. That requires either hardware on our net or foreknowledge of our encryption protocol. Or both, Mercer said. The voice was calm, Maya said. Not excited, not threatening, just informational, like he was confirming something he already knew. What was the accent? Mercer asked. She thought about it. Eastern European, not heavy, the kind of accent that belongs to someone who learned English in a formal setting, not from immersion. Mercer wrote something down. Barrett spoke from the back of the room, arms still folded. You said pre-positioned, 2 men on the slope, waiting. Yes. How long had they been there? Long enough to be settled in. They weren't moving cautiously when they came through the choke point. They expected the path to be clear, which means they knew roughly when Overwatch would break position. Yes. Barrett unfolded his arms. He had the particular expression of someone recalculating a position they'd already taken and finding it less solid than they'd thought. They had the whole approach mapped. They had my approach mapped, Maya said. The team's route through the ravine was clean. This was specifically about Overwatch. The room was quiet for a moment. Mercer looked at her steadily. You neutralized one of the interdiction team. Yes. And the other? Ran south. I didn't pursue. He nodded once. No commentary on the decision. It had been the right call and they both knew it. A single operator chasing a running target across an unsecured ridgeline at 0400 hours is a single operator asking to become a secondary casualty. Get some sleep, Mercer said to the room. Full debrief at 1400. Lynette's condition will determine next steps. People began to move. Maya was halfway to the door when Mercer's voice came again. Rhodes. She turned. That was good work tonight, he said. I'm going to need to know if you can do it again under worse conditions. She held his look. Define worse. We'll get to that. She slept 4 hours, which was not enough, and was all she was going to get. The medical bay report at 0900 established that Lynette, whose actual name was held at compartmented level, available only to Mercer and the agency liaison, had sustained a fractured orbital socket, 3 broken ribs, and evidence of prolonged stress position restraint across both wrists. He was stable. He was not going to be debriefed until the following day at the earliest. What he had managed to say to Webb during the flight back was shorter and more immediately useful than a formal debrief would have been. Webb delivered it in the operations center at 0930 with Mercer and Crawford present. He said Volkov was there, at the compound, not just running the operation remotely, physically present during the ambush setup. He saw him. Crawford looked up from his notes. And he said Volkov knew we were coming, Webb continued. He said it in those words. He said Volkov had been told the mission was incoming. The ambush wasn't reactive. It was prepared over at least 48 hours. The silence that followed had a specific quality. Maya, standing near the back wall with a cup of coffee she'd stopped drinking, felt it the way you feel a pressure change. Not with your ears, but with something behind them. 48 hours. Their mission had been finalized 36 hours before insertion. Mercer's expression didn't change. He wrote something on his notepad and capped the pen. That information stays in this room, he said. All of it. Webb. Nothing in the formal medical report beyond physical status. Crawford. Signals analysis only in the debrief transcript. He paused. We have a problem that isn't a tactical problem. Nobody asked him to elaborate. They all understood what it meant when an enemy commander knew the shape of your operation before you executed it. The full debrief at 1400 hours was a different kind of meeting. Broader attendance, a regional command liaison patched in via secure video, and the formal requirement to document everything in language that would survive a review process. Maya sat through 2 hours of it and answered every question the same way she'd given her preliminary account, accurately, completely, and without editorial additions. The liaison from Regional Command, a colonel named Hartwell, sandy-haired and precise, visible in the corner of the secure monitor, asked her twice to repeat the detail about the radio transmission. He asked it in the tone of a man who found the information inconvenient rather than alarming, and she noted that without letting it show. After the formal debrief, the liaison remained on the video link while the other officers filtered out. Mercer stayed. Maya was gathering her notes when Hartwell's voice came through the speaker. "Lieutenant Rhodes, your first combat deployment?" She stopped, turned to the monitor. "Yes, sir. Iron Wolf is a demanding assignment for someone without a combat record." "Yes, sir. I understand you performed adequately on Overwatch." She looked at him for a moment. "Adequately. I kept the team alive and the mission completed," she said. Hartwell's expression shifted by a fraction. Not much, but enough to suggest the directness had registered. "We'll see how the full assessment reads." He reached off screen, and the video link went dark. Mercer was looking at the blank screen. He turned to her. "Hartwell runs logistics authorization for this region," he said. It was a piece of information offered without comment, which meant it was meant to be filed and examined later. She filed it. The next 4 days were the particular kind of quiet that follows violent events, the camp running at its normal operational tempo. While underneath that normalcy, something was being worked out that hadn't yet surfaced. Lynette was transferred to a medical facility 2 days after the mission. The agency liaison who came to collect him spent 3 hours with Mercer in the secured operations room and left without speaking to anyone else on the team. Iron Wolf ran PT, maintained equipment, ran training scenarios on the range, and in the kill house behind the motor pool. Life in the camp had its rhythms, and those rhythms continued regardless of what the intelligence picture looked like, because rhythms were how you stayed functional in a place like this. Maya was at the range every morning at 0545. By the third morning, Kowalski was bringing coffee. He didn't offer any. He just arrived with his own cup and stood at the range observer position while she ran her drills. On the fourth morning, he spoke for the first time since the mission. "You went to the gap," he said. She lowered the rifle and looked at him. "On the ridge. You went to the choke point instead of taking the engagement at distance." He wasn't criticizing. He was identifying. "Why?" "The slope approach gave me one angle at 50 meters in the dark," she said. "Unsupported, cold barrel, moving target at night. The margin for error on that shot was acceptable but not good. If I missed, they knew exactly where I was and I had no secondary cover." "So you changed the engagement." "I changed the environment." Kowalski drank his coffee. "Your father talked to you about that? Changing the environment?" She thought about it. "He said the best shot is the one where you've already fixed every variable you can fix before you pull the trigger. Everything you can control, you control. Everything you can't, you account for. If you can't account for it, you remove it." He was talking about competition shooting. He was talking about everything, she said, and turned back to the range. Kowalski stayed until she finished. He didn't speak again, but the next morning he brought 2 cups. Barrett found her in the equipment bay on the 5th evening, and this time he didn't stand in the doorway. He came in, pulled up an ammunition crate, and sat down across from her workbench. She was running a cleaning rod through the barrel, and she kept doing it. "The regional command debrief came back," he said. "I know, Mercer briefed us." "Not all of it." He put his elbows on his knees. "Hartwell's assessment flagged your use of lethal force on the south corner target as potentially premature. Said the threat hadn't been fully established at the moment of engagement." She set the cleaning rod down. "The fighter had his weapon raised," she said. "I know that. He had a line on the team's exit path, and 11 seconds before he could close to a range where the team's movement speed couldn't compensate." "I know all of that," Barrett said. "So does Mercer. So does every person on the team." He paused. "Hartwell wasn't there." "No," she said. "He wasn't." "He's building a file," Barrett said. That's what I'm telling you. I don't know why. But the debrief language from regional command is being written in a way that creates room for interpretation. She looked at him for a long moment. Why are you telling me this? He met it. Because I was wrong about you before the mission, and that's the kind of wrong that matters. He stood up, put the crate back. And because whoever leaked our operational details to Volkov is still inside this organization somewhere, which means the next time Iron Wolf goes out, we need Overwatch we can trust. He walked out. She picked up the cleaning rod and finished the barrel. The new intelligence arrived on the 8th day after the mission. It came through the signals team, Crawford's people, running continuous monitoring on the frequencies and digital fingerprints associated with Volkov's network. At 16:30 hours, Crawford knocked on the operations center door with a tablet in his hand and a look on his face that Maya had not seen from him before. It was not alarm. Crawford didn't do alarm. It was the look of someone who has found a piece that completes a picture they wish had remained incomplete. Mercer read the tablet. His expression did not change, but he pulled out a chair and sat down, which he did not normally do in the middle of the afternoon. He looked up at Crawford. How confident? The signal fingerprint matches at 91%. It's the same communication architecture Volkov's network used for the Korvac compound coordination. Crawford set the tablet on the table. But the origin point isn't in the Korvac range. He tapped the screen. The map showed a location 240 kilometers northwest of Camp Sentinel, an industrial valley, a cluster of structures that the satellite imagery tagged as a former mining operation. He moved fast, Mercer said. He moved before we hit the compound, Crawford said. This traffic started 31 hours before our insertion. He wasn't retreating. He was redeploying. Mercer looked at the map for a long time. He wasn't trying to hold the Korvac compound, Maya said from the doorway. Both men looked at her. She hadn't been invited into this conversation. She'd been walking past and the door had been open, and she'd stopped because the map on the tablet was visible, and the shape of what it meant had arrived in her mind before she'd decided to speak. I was using it, she said. The compound was a staging point, an operation designed to give him information about how we operate, how we respond, what our Overwatch doctrine looks like. Linnet was bait. The compound was a controlled environment. Crawford looked at Mercer. Mercer looked at Maya. Come in, he said. Close the door. Wab. The three of them spent the next 2 hours working through it. Crawford laid out the signal's timeline. Mercer cross-referenced the tactical sequence from the mission. Maya sketched the terrain geometry from memory, the approach routes, the firing positions, the angles Volkov's pre-positioned team had used on the ridge. The picture that emerged was not comfortable. Volkov had known enough about Iron Wolf's operational doctrine to design an environment that would produce specific, observable behaviors. He'd known they would insert from the south. He'd known the Overwatch position would be northeast, because that was the only ridge that commanded the compound's northern face and the extraction route simultaneously. He'd known the sniper would break position after the team cleared the objective and move north along the ridgeline toward the pickup zone. He hadn't known Maya would move faster than expected. He hadn't known she'd take the choke point engagement instead of the open slope shot. He studied the previous Iron Wolf sniper, Maya said. It landed in the room with a flatness that made both men go still. The doctrine, the movement patterns, the decision-making under pressure. He built his trap around a profile that doesn't match mine, Crawford said slowly. Staff Sergeant Reeve, Overwatch for Iron Wolf before your assignment. Mercer's jaw tightened by a fraction. Reeve was KIA 14 months ago, Crawford said, mostly to himself now. Volkov's been building this operation for at least 14 months. The room was quiet. He had a source, Maya said. Someone who could give him not just mission details, but operational doctrine, movement patterns, sniper SOPs. Tactical doctrine isn't in a logistics manifest, Mercer said. He said it carefully, the way you say something when you already know where it leads. It's in after-action reports, mission assessments, training records. Hartwell reviews all of that, Crawford said. Mercer said nothing. Crawford looked at his tablet, then at Mercer. Commander? I heard you. I heard you, Crow. Mercer's voice was quiet and had a weight in it that was not anger and not grief, but something that lived between the two. He stood up, walked to the window, a narrow slit of reinforced glass that looked north toward the ridge. Outside, the late afternoon light was turning the rock faces orange, and the shadows were going long and dark. He stood there for a moment. "Nobody moves on this," he said, without turning around. "Nothing in writing, nothing on the system. We work it quietly, and we work it from the inside until we know what we actually have." He turned back. "If we're wrong, we've just accused a senior officer of treason based on a signals intercept and an inference chain." "And if we're right?" Crawford asked. Mercer looked at the map. "Then Volkov isn't just 240 kilometers away," he said. "He's been getting better intelligence than we have, and the next operation he runs won't be designed to study us." He paused. "It'll be designed to end us." The room held that for a moment. Maya looked at the map on the tablet. The mining valley, the cluster of structures, the quiet signal traffic that had been running for 31 hours before anyone on their team had even been told a mission was being planned. She thought about the voice on the radio, calm, accented, precise. "I know your position, not a threat, not a boast, a statement of fact, offered by a man who believed he understood exactly what she would do next." She looked at the terrain sketch she'd made, the choke point, the slope approach, the angles that hadn't quite fit his model. He'd been wrong about her once. He was already working on not being wrong again. And somewhere in the organizational structure above Camp Sentinel, in the filing systems and access logs and the quiet architecture of institutional trust, the person who had handed him that wrongness was still seated at a desk, still moving paper, still feeding the machine that was supposed to protect the people it was slowly helping to kill. Maya folded her terrain sketch and put it in her pocket. "What do you need from me?" she asked. Mercer looked at her. He had the expression of a man who was making a decision about something he didn't have complete information for, which was the only kind of decision available to him. "Right now?" he said. "Nothing. Go eat something. Sleep." She nodded, turned toward the door. "Rhodes." She stopped. "You said he built his trap around a profile that doesn't match yours." He held her look. "Make sure it stays that way." She left the room. In the corridor outside, she stood for a moment in the concrete-walled quiet of the camp's interior, listening to the hum of the generator and the distant sound of wind against the north-facing walls. And she thought about her father's voice. Not the lesson, not the discipline, not the long afternoons on the range working fractional adjustments into permanent memory. She thought about the last thing he'd said to her, 2 weeks before the aneurysm that had taken him quietly in the night without warning or ceremony. "The people who underestimate you will keep doing it," he'd said, "until the moment they can't. Your job is to make sure that moment comes at a time of your choosing, not theirs." She walked down the corridor toward the mess. Behind her, in the operations center, Crawford was already pulling signal logs, and Mercer was standing at the window watching the last of the light leave the mountains, and somewhere in a mining valley 240 kilometers to the northwest, a man who believed he was 3 moves ahead was sitting with his intelligence reports and his careful calculations, preparing the next evolution of a trap that had already almost worked once. He was patient. He was thorough. He was building something that would require Iron Wolf to walk into a space he had designed, engage a threat he had constructed, and depend on an Overwatch sniper whose every instinct he believed he had mapped. What he didn't know, what he couldn't know, because the person feeding him information had never observed it, was the moment on the ridgeline when Maya Rhodes had stopped, assessed the variables she could control, and quietly removed the ones she couldn't. He had a profile. She had already stopped fitting it. The mess hall at Camp Sentinel served 2 hot meals a day and a standing arrangement of bread, peanut butter, and whatever fruit the supply runs managed to bring in from Bagram. Maya ate alone at the end of the long table nearest the door, working through a bowl of something that had started as beef stew and arrived as a thick brown approximation of it. She wasn't tasting it. She was thinking about signal architecture and access logs, and the particular way Colonel Hartwell had asked her to repeat herself twice during the debrief, not because he hadn't heard her, but because he was deciding something while she spoke. She was still thinking about it when Voss sat down across from her. Voss didn't ask. She just set her tray down and pulled up the bench with the efficient economy of movement that characterized everything she did. She had a coffee in addition to her food, which at 1900 hours meant she wasn't planning on sleeping soon. "You look like you're doing math," Voss said. "I'm always doing math." "This is different math." Voss broke a piece of bread in half. "Post-mission math. The kind where you run the sequence back and find all the places it almost went a different direction. Maya looked up from her stew. I blew the second RPG shooter before I confirmed his partner, Maya said. 40 meters north, behind the parapet. I clocked him on my first sweep and filed him as non-threatening because his body language read as observational. He'd shifted to the launcher by the time I came back to him on the third rotation. She paused. 3 seconds slower, and he gets a shot off into the ravine exit. Voss chewed her bread and said nothing for a moment. Did he get a shot off? No. Then you weren't 3 seconds slow. I was close enough that it matters. Voss looked at her with the steady attention of someone who has learned to distinguish between productive self-assessment and the kind that becomes a weight you carry into the next operation. There's a version of this conversation that's useful, she said, and a version that just keeps you up. I know which one it is. Good. Voss picked up her fork. Then eat your food. They ate in silence for a while. The mess hall had 4 other occupants. 2 support personnel playing cards near the far wall, a comms technician eating and reading simultaneously, and Huang, who had fallen asleep with his head on his folded arms at the table nearest the coffee station, a half-full cup still steaming near his elbow. Hartwell's assessment, Maya said. Voss didn't look up. I heard. He flagged my south corner engagement. I know. I had 11 seconds and a confirmed weapon raise. I know that too. Voss set her fork down. Hartwell has flagged 2 other Iron Wolf actions in the last 8 months. Both were clean calls. Both got walked back after formal review. She picked her fork back up. He files the flag, it sits in the system, review clears it, and nothing officially changes. But the flag is in the record. Maya looked at her. Why? She said. Voss met the question directly. I don't know. What I know is that it's a pattern, and patterns mean something. She stood, picked up her tray. Get some sleep, Rhodes. Tomorrow Mercer's going to run us through a full tactical revision based on last night, and he is not going to be gentle about it. She walked toward the tray return. Maya finished her stew. Mercer was not gentle about it. The tactical revision ran from 0800 to 1300 the following day and covered every decision point in the Korvac mission with the unsentimental precision of a man who believed that comfort in the debrief room was a direct path to casualties in the field. He ran the team through the ambush response, the compound breach, the Overwatch engagement sequence, and the extraction ridge contact. He asked hard questions, and he waded through uncomfortable silences when the answers weren't immediate. When he got to the Overwatch sequence, he put the satellite overlay on the monitor and walked through Maya's engagement timeline shot by shot. RPG-1, 1,082 meters, he said, pointing to the northern rooftop position. Engagement time from threat confirmation to round impact, 4.3 seconds. RPG-2, 1,091 meters, different angle, wind shift. Time from prior shot to second impact, 3.8 seconds. He looked at the room. Explain to me the wind shift adjustment between those 2 shots. The room looked at Maya. She pulled the chalk from the table edge and went to the board. She drew the ridge angle relative to the compound, marked the thermal pocket above the northern wall that the floodlights had created, hot air rising off 8 high-intensity lights, hitting cold mountain air, and traced the rotational effect on a crosswind moving northeast at 11 kilometers per hour. The thermal column off the lights pushed the crosswind into a partial deflection, she said. The wind wasn't moving in a straight line across my firing path. It was curving. The second shot had a different effective crosswind value than the first, even though the source direction hadn't changed. Crawford was watching with an expression that suggested he was running the math and finding it correct and wasn't entirely comfortable with how quickly she'd identified it. You calculated that in under 4 seconds, Webb said. I didn't calculate it, she said. I read it. Barrett, sitting in the second row, had his arms on the table now instead of folded. He was looking at the board. Your father teach you that? He said. Not sarcastic, straight. No, she said. He taught me the base theory. The reading part comes from about 12,000 hours behind a scope. She set the chalk down and returned to her seat. Mercer looked at the board for a moment. Then he moved on to the machine gun truck engagement and the decision to hit the engine block instead of the cab. The intelligence picture sharpened over the following week. Crawford's signals team ran continuous monitoring on the Mining Valley location and built a traffic pattern that told a story in the aggregate, communication volume, transmission timing, encryption protocol variations. That individually meant nothing and collectively meant a command and control node was operating at significant capacity. Volkov wasn't hiding. He was working. Mercer convened a restricted planning session on the 12th day after the Korvac mission. Restricted meant 5 people: Mercer, Crawford, Voss, Maya, and Barrett, who had, without any formal announcement, shifted into a different relationship with the group. He was still hard-edged and blunt and constitutionally suspicious of anything that looked like it was going well. But he asked questions now instead of making declarations, and he listened to the answers. The Mining Valley target was designated Foxhole. The objective was not a rescue this time. It was a disruption operation. Destroy the command and control infrastructure, eliminate Volkov's network coordination capacity, and if the opportunity presented itself, capture or neutralize Volkov directly. Maya studied the topographic package on Foxhole for 3 days straight. The terrain was fundamentally different from Korvac. The mining valley ran roughly east to west, and the main facility, a collection of buildings centered around the old ore processing plant, sat on the valley floor. The surrounding high ground was not the dramatic cliff and ridge architecture of the Korvac range. It was more gradual, more complex, with multiple overlapping elevation lines that created a firing environment with more variables and fewer clean angles. There was no obvious overwatch position. That was the first thing she told Mercer. There's no single location that covers the primary objective, the secondary access route, and the extraction corridor, she said, putting her trace terrain sketch on the planning table. Overlook positions on the North Ridge give me the facility, but the eastern access road falls into dead ground at this angle. She marked it. South Ridge inverts the problem. I have the eastern road but lose the facility's western approach. So you need 2 positions, Barrett said. I need 1 position and a pre-planned relocation route, she said. 2 positions mean 2 sets of tracks on the ground before the mission, 2 potential compromise points. 1 position with a prepared alternate gives me flexibility without doubling the exposure. Mercer was studying the sketch. Where's the alternate? She pointed to a rock formation on the northern ridge's eastern spur, a lower elevation than the primary position, more exposed, but with an angle that opened the eastern road and the facility's rear approach simultaneously. Here. It's not ideal. The range to the facility's main structure from that position is 1,340 meters, and there's a terrain feature that puts the western third of the compound in dead ground, but it covers what the primary position doesn't. Distance from primary to alternate? 220 meters of open ridge. 3.5 minutes at a careful pace. Faster if I don't care about the noise. Crawford looked up from his map. There's a problem. Everyone looked at him. He put his finger on the northern ridge's eastern spur, the alternate position. This feature. He traced a curved line south of it. Old mining road, vehicle accessible. Maya looked at where his finger was. The mining road curved to within 400 meters of the alternate position. 400 meters of open ground was a vulnerability, not a defensive perimeter. He'll have vehicle patrols, she said. Assuming he runs the same security doctrine as Korvac, yes. She stared at the map, ran the geometry in her head, recalculated the relocation route 3 different ways. I need the patrol timing, she said. If Crawford can give me the patrol interval from signals intelligence, I can time the relocation to the gap. And if the patrol interval changes, Mercer asked, then I improvise. He held her look. Last time he had people waiting on the ridge. Last time he had 14 months to study Iron Wolf's doctrine, she said. This time he has 12 days and a sniper who didn't behave the way his model predicted. The room was quiet. He'll adapt his model, Mercer said. Yes, she said. But he doesn't know what to adapt it to yet. He knows I moved faster than expected and I chose close quarters over a supported long shot. That's not enough information to build a new profile. He's going to be working with uncertainty, and that means his pre-positioning will be less specific. Or he compensates by covering more ground, Barrett said. That spreads his interdiction assets thin, Maya said, which means slower response time and less concentration at any single point. She paused. It's not a clean solution. There isn't one. But it's better than giving him a repeat of the Korvac geometry. Mercer looked at the map for a long moment. Then he picked up the chalk and marked the primary position and the alternate with a single line between them. Planet, he said. Full route survey? Timing windows. Abort criteria. I want it on my desk in 48 hours. She delivered it in 36. The mission was set for the following week. In the intervening days, Iron Wolf ran 3 full rehearsals of the facility breach sequence in a mock-up Crawford's team built from the satellite imagery. Not a perfect replica, but close enough to internalize the geometry of the approach corridors and the building interior. Maya ran her Overwatch sequences separately, timing the relocation route against a stopwatch, learning the feel of the ridge terrain from the aerial photographs until she could close her eyes and walk the path in sequence. On the 4th night before the mission, she was running a late equipment check when she heard voices in the corridor outside the operations center. Not arguing, but edged, the particular register of a conversation that both parties want to be private, and neither has quite managed to make so. She recognized Mercer's voice. The second voice took her a moment. Hartwell. She was still, her hands on the rifle components, listening not to the words. She couldn't make those out clearly through the door, but to the rhythm. Short exchanges. Hartwell's voice with an insistent, pressing quality. Mercer's responses shorter, flatter, the voice of a man giving away nothing while being pushed to give something. It lasted 4 minutes. Then footsteps. Hartwell's, moving away. Then silence. Then the operations center door opened and Mercer walked in, saw her at the workbench, and said nothing for a moment. "Sir?" she said. He pulled a chair out and sat down heavily. He looked at the rifle components on the bench with the unfocused attention of someone who is not actually seeing what they're looking at. Hartwell is pushing to insert a regional command observer into the Foxhole mission, he said. A forward liaison, standard oversight role. She was quiet. I pushed back, he said. I don't have grounds to refuse it outright. He has the authority if he wants to exercise it. Is he going to? I don't know yet. Mercer rubbed the back of his neck. He framed it as command oversight. Normal procedure for a second consecutive operation against a high-value target. He paused. It's not normal procedure. No, she said. He also asked about your Foxhole Overwatch plan. She set down the bolt assembly she was holding. He asked specifically, she said. He asked about Overwatch positioning doctrine for the target environment, whether we'd identified primary and alternate positions. Mercer looked at her. I told him it was in the planning documents and that he had access to the planning documents, which meant that if Hartwell was the source, Volkov would know whatever was in those documents within hours of Hartwell reading them. She said it before she'd decided to. We put something wrong in the plan, she said. Mercer looked at her. Not wrong enough to compromise the mission, she said quickly. The primary position is solid. We keep that clean. But the alternate position, we mark it somewhere it isn't. If Volkov prepositions interdiction on a location that doesn't match what we actually use, we confirm the source and we've removed one of his advantages simultaneously. The room was quiet. If Hartwell is clean, Mercer said, this changes nothing. The real position is still the real position. And if he's not, Maya said, we've just told Volkov to send his people somewhere I'm not going to be. Mercer looked at the planning documents on the table. He looked at them for a long time with the particular expression of a senior officer calculating not just what the right tactical decision was, but what it meant to have arrived at a place where he was having this conversation at all. Do it, he said. Run it past me before it goes into the system. The false position went into the planning document the following morning. A rock formation on the southern ridge that had genuine visual plausibility as an Overwatch site, close enough to the real primary position that the error could always be attributed to a coordinate transcription mistake, far enough from the actual firing position that anyone pre-placed there would be watching the wrong ground. Maya built the revision into the document with Crawford's help and said nothing to the rest of the team about why. Barrett noticed anyway. He caught up with her on the way to the range, falling into step beside her with the deliberate casualness of someone who has decided to approach a subject carefully. The alternate position in the plan, he said. She kept walking. Southern Spur doesn't give you the eastern road, he said. The ridge blocks it at that elevation. You'd know that. She looked at him sideways. There's a reason. I figured there was. I can't tell you the specifics. He walked in silence for about 10 meters. Does Mercer know? Yes. Okay, he said. And that was it. He split off toward the kill house and she continued to the range and neither of them mentioned it again. The night before Foxhole, Maya sat on her bunk in the dark and assembled her rifle from memory, eyes closed, hands moving through the sequence her father had drilled into her until it became something closer to reflex than procedure. Receiver, barrel, bolt assembly, optic, bipod. She could do it in under 90 seconds. She'd been able to do it in under 90 seconds since she was 19 years old. She opened her eyes and looked at the assembled rifle in the low light. In the folded photograph tucked inside her front chest pocket, a habit she'd developed at some point in training and never analyzed, was a picture of her father at a competition range, eye to scope, everything about his posture expressing the particular focused calm of someone who has reduced the world to a single point of contact between thought and action. She didn't take it out. She didn't need to. She had the image memorized the same way she had the rifle sequence memorized. She thought about what he would say about tomorrow. He would not say anything about Volkov, or about Hartwell, or about the false position in the planning document, or about the 12 days of preparation that had led to this particular night. He would ask her one question, the same question he had asked before every competition stage she'd ever run. What can you control? The answer was always the same, and it was always shorter than people expected. Myself. Not the wind, not the target, not the team's movement or the enemy's response, or the intelligence picture, or the political machinery operating somewhere above the operation. Not the mole, or the mission, or the mountain, just herself, her breath, her hold, her decisions in the sequence of seconds. When everything that had been planned met everything that had not been anticipated. She set the rifle in the case, sealed the latches, and lay down on the bunk without taking off her boots. She was asleep in 4 minutes. Foxhole inserted at 0200. The approach to the mining valley was longer than Korvac, a 6-kilometer infill on foot from the vehicle drop point, moving through the lower terrain of the valley's western approach, before Iron Wolf split at the fork and Maya peeled north toward the ridge. The night was clear and cold, and the wind was coming out of the east, which she'd noted in the pre-mission weather data and which changed 2 of her pre-calculated firing solutions by enough to matter. She adjusted the solutions in her head as she climbed. The northern ridge approach was steeper than the aerial imagery had suggested. Aerial photography flattened elevation gradients in a way that always required physical correction, and twice she had to redirect around rock sections that would have been unstable under her weight. She moved carefully, faster than Korvac because she knew the cost of arriving late, slower than she wanted to because a turned ankle on this approach meant the team had no overwatch at all. She reached the primary position at 0314. It was good ground, better than she'd expected. The rock shelf was wider and deeper than the imagery had shown, with a natural backstop that would absorb her muzzle signature, and a forward angle that gave her the facility's main structure, the western approach, and the primary breach point without repositioning. She set up the bipod, settled into the position, and spent 8 minutes behind the scope mapping every detail the satellite imagery had approximated. The facility was lit, not floodlit like Korvac. The lighting here was operational, work lighting, the kind that illuminated specific areas rather than broadcasting a perimeter. She counted 10 visible personnel over the first 20 minutes of observation. 2 vehicle positions, a pickup with a mounted weapon on the northern edge of the facility, and a larger vehicle near the eastern access road that was running its engine despite being stationary. She keyed her radio. Overwatch is set. Primary position. I have 10 visible. 2 vehicles, north and east. Eastern vehicle is running. Engine warm. Mercer's voice came back immediately. Copy. We're at the approach fork. Give me a guard rotation assessment when you have it. Working it, she said. She watched the guards cycle for 15 minutes, mapping the intervals and the coverage gaps. The rotation was less disciplined than Korvac. Irregular intervals, guards stopping to talk. One man who spent 4 minutes at the eastern vehicle's passenger window before resuming his patrol. Less professional. Which meant either Volkov had pulled his best people for something else, or this location was considered lower risk, or the eastern vehicle's engine cut. Both doors opened simultaneously. 6 men got out, not guards. The way they moved was different, equipment heavy, purposeful, spreading immediately into positions that covered the northern ridge. Maya's hand found the radio before she finished the thought. Iron Wolf, hold, she said. I have a second element. 6 armed, just dismounted from the eastern vehicle. They're positioning on the northern approach. She tracked them through the scope. They're not patrolling, they're setting a line. Interdiction, Mercer said. Yes, but they're facing north. She tracked the line of men. They're facing the southern spur, the false position, the rock formation on the southern ridge that she'd planted in the planning document. They were covering a position she was never going to be in. She felt something cold move through her that was not temperature. A confirmation arriving, clean and terrible. The falsified document had been read. The information had moved, and Volkov had sent 6 men to a position on the southern ridge to intercept a sniper who was actually 400 meters north of where they were looking. "Mercer," she said quietly. "I heard it," he said. His voice had a flatness that meant he'd heard exactly what she'd heard and was doing what she was doing, taking it in, filing it, continuing the mission, because the mission was still the mission, regardless of what the confirmation meant. "They're not going to find anyone down there," she said. "No," he said. "They're not. How long before they figure that out?" She watched the 6 men settling into their positions on the southern spur. They were good, better than she'd initially assessed. They were moving quietly and finding cover with the efficiency of trained operators. 40 minutes, she said, maybe an hour. Once they've held the position long enough to expect contact and it doesn't come, someone's going to start asking questions. "That's our window," Mercer said. "We move in 15. Overwatch, I need you sharp." "I'm sharp," she said. She exhaled slowly, settling deeper into the position, and brought the facility's main structure back into the center of her scope. The wind out of the east had steadied in the last 20 minutes, less variable than the pre-mission data had suggested, which was one thing working in her favor. She made the final adjustments to her firing solutions, cataloged the 10 visible personnel and their current positions, noted the northern vehicle's gun mount orientation, and set the sequence in her mind. She thought about the 6 men on the southern spur, waiting for her in the wrong place. She thought about the voice on the radio at Korvac, calm, accented, precise. The voice of a man who had believed he understood her completely. She brought the main entrance of the facility into her crosshairs and held it. Mercer's voice in her ear, quiet as a breath. "Iron Wolf is moving. We are committed." Below her, in the darkness of the valley floor, 5 operators began their approach to a facility whose commander had arranged his defenses based on information that was perfectly, deliberately wrong. And on the southern spur, 6 men lay in the cold and the dark and watched a piece of empty rock. The mission was 3 minutes old when the first thing went wrong. Not with Iron Wolf. With Maya. The sound came from directly above her. A scrape of boot on rock, deliberate, close, no more than 8 meters up the face behind her position. And she understood in the space between one heartbeat and the next that Volkov had not sent all his people to the southern spur. He had sent most of them. And he had sent the rest here. Not to the false position, to the real one. She had 2 seconds before whoever was above her cleared the rock face and had a line on her position. And she spent both of them making a decision that her father had never explicitly taught her, and that she knew anyway, the way you know certain things, not because someone explained them, but because you've spent enough time in the quiet places where your own instincts speak clearly enough to hear. She left the rifle. She rolled left off the bipod, came up against the western face of the rock shelf, pressed flat, and went completely still. The figure that came over the top of the rock face above her was alone. One man, moving carefully, rifle up, scanning the position. He was looking at the bipod, at the rifle, at the position she'd vacated. He had not yet looked left. She had approximately 4 seconds before he did. She used 3 of them. The engagement was close and fast and not clean. Nothing that happened at arm's length in the dark on unstable rock was ever clean. And when it was over, she was breathing hard against the rock face with scraped palms and a shoulder that had taken the worst of the fall, and the man who had come over the ridge was no longer a problem. She got back behind the rifle in 11 seconds. Her hands were shaking slightly. Not from fear, from adrenaline, which was different and manageable. She found the facility in the scope. Iron Wolf was already at the outer perimeter. "Overwatch," Mercer said in her ear. "Status." She took one breath. "Overwatch is good," she said. "1 contact on the primary position, neutralized. Someone fed him the real location, not just the false one." She paused. "He came alone. Either they didn't have more assets to split, or it was a probe." A short silence. "Can you still cover the breach?" Mercer said. She settled her cheek against the stock, found the facility entrance, watched the guard on the northern wall begin his rotation. "Yes," she said, "then cover it." She fired the first round 11 seconds later, and the guard on the northern wall did not complete his rotation. An Iron Wolf went through the breach in the 4-second window she'd created, and the mission continued into the dark facility below her with the particular unstoppable momentum of an operation that has already absorbed its worst surprise and decided to keep moving anyway. Her shoulder ached, her hand steadied. She kept shooting. The facility went loud at the 4-minute mark. Maya heard it through her earpiece before she saw it. The compressed crack of a flashbang followed immediately by automatic fire, short controlled bursts that told her Iron Wolf had found resistance inside the main structure earlier than the plan anticipated. She was already scanning the facility perimeter when the northern vehicle's gun mount swung toward the breach point, the gunner tracking movement he could hear but not yet see. She put a round through the mount's feed mechanism. The gun seized. The gunner dropped behind the vehicle's cab and stayed there. "Overwatch, we have a secondary element in the processing building," Mercer's voice came through tight and moving. 8 to 10 personnel, armed. They were waiting inside. We're in contact. "I see the processing building," she said. "North face has 2 exit points, a main door and a loading bay. Loading bay door is opening right now." "Can you hold it?" 2 figures appeared in the loading bay, moving to flank. "Holding it," she said, and fired twice. The loading bay stayed empty after that. The firefight inside the facility lasted 9 minutes by Maya's count. She tracked it through the audio in her earpiece and through what she could observe at the building's exterior, managing the perimeter while Iron Wolf worked the interior. Webb's voice twice, calling movement. Barrett, sharp and clipped, directing Huang through a secondary corridor. Voss, calm in the way that people who work with explosive compounds tend to be calm in firefights, which was a specific kind of calm that came from long familiarity with the idea that some things simply go wrong, and the only productive response is to continue. Crawford stayed on comms throughout, managing the radio picture and feeding Mercer updates from the signals team monitoring Volkov's network traffic. At the 11-minute mark, Crawford's voice changed register. "Mercer, Volkov's personal frequency just went active. He's transmitting from inside the facility." A 2-second pause. "Say again," Mercer said. "He's in the building. He was in the building when we inserted." Another pause, shorter. "Alive or running?" "Traffic pattern suggests running. He's calling for extraction." Mercer's voice came back with a compression in it that Maya recognized as the sound of a commander revising a mission in real time. "All elements. Volkov is in the facility. He is attempting to extract. Seal every exit. Overwatch. Anything moves on the exterior, it stops." "Copy," she said. She widened her scan, covering the facility's full perimeter now. 4 sides, 2 vehicle positions, the loading bay, 3 personnel doors she'd mapped during the pre-mission study. The 6-man element on the southern spur was still there, still watching empty rock, still waiting for a contact that wasn't coming. She checked them and dismissed them and went back to the facility. A figure appeared at the processing building's eastern personnel door, moving fast. Not a guard. The equipment profile was wrong, too much carried, the movement pattern of someone who had packed for a longer journey than a perimeter patrol. She tracked him. He crossed 17 meters of open ground between the processing building and the vehicle park, moving with the low, fast profile of someone who knew they were exposed and had decided that speed was better than cover. She had a clean solution. She held it. "Mercer," she said. "Single figure, eastern side, moving from processing building to vehicle park. Equipment profile suggests prepared for movement. Possible HVT." A half-second. Description. Male, dark jacket, carrying a case and a pack, moving too deliberately for a guard. "Hold him." She put a round into the dirt 2 meters ahead of the figure. He stopped. Went flat immediately. Trained response, no hesitation. "He's down," she reported. "Prone, eastern vehicle park, not moving." "Barrett, Webb, eastern vehicle park now," Mercer said. 60 seconds later. "We have him," Barrett said. Then after a pause that had a specific quality to it, the pause of someone looking at a face and cross-referencing it against a photograph they've memorized. "It's him. It's Volkov." The facility went quiet over the next 4 minutes as Iron Wolf cleared the remaining personnel. Maya held her position, covering the perimeter until Mercer called the all clear. And then she held it for another 6 minutes after that because all clears were assessments, not facts. And the 6-man element on the southern spur was still unaccounted for. When they finally began moving, Retreating, actually, withdrawing back toward the eastern access road when no contact materialized at their position. She tracked them out of her scope range and keyed her radio. Southern Spur element is withdrawing, she said. 6 personnel moving east on the access road. Let them go, Mercer said. We have what we came for. Ichan. The extraction was a controlled movement. Volkov flex-cuffed and silent between Barrett and Webb, the team carrying significant intelligence material Crawford's people had pulled from the facility's communications center, and Maya coming off the ridge 40 minutes after the all-clear, with her shoulder aching from the rock-face contact and her hands finally fully steady. The helicopter picked them up at 0511. Volkov sat in the cargo bay without speaking. He was in his early 50s, compact, with a broad face and pale eyes that moved constantly, not nervously, but with the perpetual assessment of someone who has spent decades reading rooms and calculating angles. He looked at each Iron Wolf operator in sequence. The way you look at a problem, you're still working. When his eyes reached Maya, they stayed there for a moment longer than they'd stayed on the others. She looked back at him. He looked away first. The preliminary debrief at Camp Sentinel ran for 3 hours and produced a document that Crawford's team began transmitting to Regional Command before the team had finished their first meal of the day. The intelligence material from the facility's communications center was substantial. Network contacts, financial routing, operational timelines for planned actions that hadn't yet been executed. Crawford described it as the most significant single-source intelligence haul the unit had produced in 2 years. Volkov was transported to a secure facility at 1400 hours, flanked by 2 agency personnel who arrived at Camp Sentinel with the particular clipped efficiency of people who had been waiting for this specific package for a long time. Before they took him, he was held in the operations center for a preliminary interview, standard procedure, conducted by Mercer with Crawford present. Maya was not in the room. She was in the equipment bay working on her shoulder, which had swollen enough that Webb had told her to keep ice on it and not lift anything heavier than a coffee cup. She was not lifting anything heavier than a coffee cup when Barrett appeared in the doorway. "Interview's done," he said. "How'd it go?" He talked. Barrett leaned against the doorframe. "Not about everything, but enough." He paused. He confirmed the source. He didn't give a name, said he'd keep that for the formal process, but he confirmed the category. Senior Logistics Authorization, Regional Command Level, access to operational planning documents, and after-action assessments. Maya set down the ice pack. "Hartwell," she said. "He didn't say the name." "But," Barrett looked at her steadily. "But, yeah." She sat with that for a moment. Not satisfaction. It wasn't that. It was the particular heaviness that comes when a thing you suspected becomes a thing you know, and the knowing has weight that the suspicion didn't. "The false position," she said. "If Hartwell fed it to Volkov, then Volkov sent people to the Southern Spur based on bad coordinates, and the man he sent to the real position came alone because that was all he had left after committing 6 to the Spur." Barrett crossed his arms. "Your gamble worked." "It wasn't a gamble," she said. "It was a controlled variable." He looked at her with an expression that was not quite a smile and not quite respect, and was something in the vicinity of both. "That's what your father would call it." "That's what the outcome calls it," she said. "My father would have called it making the best decision available with incomplete information and then executing it cleanly." "And the guy on the rock face?" "Incomplete execution," she said. "I left prints on the approach that a thorough pre-mission scout could have followed. I was moving faster than was optimal for noise discipline because I was behind my timeline." She looked at the ice pack. "He found the position. I was just faster inside it." Barrett said nothing for a moment. "You know what the difference is," he said, "between someone who says that and someone who's actually learned something?" She looked at him. "The first kind is making excuses by dressing them up as analysis," he said. "You're actually doing the analysis." He pushed off the doorframe. "Mercer wants the team in the operations center at 1700. He left. She put the ice pack back on her shoulder. The 1700 meeting had a different atmosphere than any previous session Maya had attended at Camp Sentinel. It wasn't the post-mission energy of the Korvac debrief or the planning tension of the foxhole preparation. It was quieter than both, a room full of people who had just watched something significant happen and were in the process of understanding what it meant. Mercer stood at the front with his hands in his pockets, which was the posture he used when he was choosing words with particular care. Volkov's preliminary interview produced a confirmation of an intelligence compromise at regional command level, he said. Formal investigation has been initiated by the Inspector General's office as of 2 hours ago. The officer under investigation has been suspended from duties pending review. He paused. I'm not going to say the name in this room because it's now a legal matter and this room is not the appropriate venue. Nobody asked him to say it. What I will say, he continued, is that the intelligence compromise explains both the Korvac ambush and the pre-positioning at Foxhole. It also explains 3 previous operational anomalies over the past 8 months that we attributed to other causes. He looked around the room. We were being read, consistently and thoroughly. Every planning document, every after-action report, every assessment of our operational doctrine went through a single authorization point, and that point was compromised. Crawford spoke. The false position document. Yes, Mercer said. That was Rhodes. It wasn't a question. Everyone in the room looked at her. She didn't look for Barrett, but she could feel him not reacting in her peripheral vision, which was its own kind of statement. Lieutenant Rhodes identified the access pattern and proposed a controlled test, Mercer said. I authorized it. The execution was hers. Voss, from the second row, said simply, smart. Webb nodded once. Huang was looking at Maya with the particular expression of someone recalculating a position they'd formed early and held too long. Barrett said nothing. He didn't need to. The investigation will take time, Mercer said. In the interim, Iron Wolf stands down from operational tasking for a minimum of 2 weeks. Full review of all planning documentation from the past year. Crawford's team is already on it. He looked around the room one more time. What happened on this operation? On both operations. That stays inside this unit until the investigation is complete. All of it. Clear? A chorus of affirmatives, variously expressed. Good. Get some rest. You've earned it. The formal investigation arrived at Camp Sentinel 3 days later in the form of 2 personnel from the Inspector General's office and a legal officer from the Judge Advocate General's Corps. They were professional, thorough, and they wanted to speak with everyone who had been present for either the Korvac mission or Foxhole, in sequence, individually, in a room with a recording device and a transcript. Maya's interview lasted 2 hours and 40 minutes. She answered every question the same way she'd shot at 1,100 meters, accurately, completely, without inflation or omission. She described the radio transmission at Korvac. She described the pre-positioned element on the extraction ridge. She described the signal's timeline Crawford had identified, the Hartwell conversation she'd overheard, the reasoning behind the false position document. The IG officer, a woman named Carver with short gray hair and reading glasses she kept removing and replacing, asked her the same question 3 different ways at different points in the interview. At the time you proposed the false position document, did you have direct evidence linking Colonel Hartwell to the intelligence compromise? First time, no. I had a pattern of access, a behavioral anomaly during the debrief, and a signals timeline that excluded most other explanations. Second time, rephrased, the same answer. Circumstantial inference, not direct evidence. Third time, later in the interview after considerable intervening material, still no. The false document was a test designed to generate direct evidence. It wasn't premature action based on a conclusion. It was a controlled method of reaching one. Carver looked at her over the reading glasses the third time. You're precise. I'm a sniper, Maya said. Precision is occupational. Something shifted in Carver's expression. The faintest acknowledgement, there and gone. After the interview, Maya sat in the corridor outside the interview room for a few minutes before going back to the main compound. Her shoulder was improving. Still stiff, still sore, at the full range of motion, but functional. Webb had told her 2 more days of reduced activity, and then she could return to the range. She was thinking about the range when Mercer found her in the corridor. He sat down in the chair beside her without preamble, which was how she'd come to understand he operated when he wanted to have a conversation that wasn't a briefing. Carver's assessment is going to support the investigation, he said. She told me as much after your interview. The false position document is going to be a central piece of evidence. Good, Maya said. The JAG officer has questions about the engagement on the primary position, the contact on the rock face. She'd expected this. What kind of questions? Procedural. He wants to understand the decision sequence. Mercer paused. I've seen the decision sequence. It's clean, but he's going to want to hear it from you. Okay? It might be uncomfortable. Debrief rooms are supposed to be uncomfortable, she said. That's how they work. Mercer looked at her. Your father say that too? No, that one's mine. He was quiet for a moment. Outside, through the compound's ventilation shaft, she could hear the wind picking up against the north-facing walls. The same sound she'd heard on her first night at Sentinel, lying awake in her bunk running range math in her head. When I reviewed your training file before you arrived, Mercer said, I saw the marksmanship records, the competition results, the qualification scores. He paused. What the file didn't tell me was how you think. She waited. 2 operations, he said. You modified your approach after the first because you understood he was studying you. You identified the compromise without direct evidence and designed a test clean enough that it held up to IG review. You handled a close contact threat on the primary position and returned to effective overwatch inside 12 seconds. He was not listing these things as praise. He was listing them the way you list the properties of a material you're trying to accurately classify. The file said you were David Rhodes's daughter, and you could shoot. That's accurate, she said. It undersells it by a considerable margin. She looked at the floor for a moment. He didn't teach me to think like this, she said. He taught me to slow down in the moment of highest pressure. Everything else followed from that. She paused. He also taught me that the shot you're most confident about is the one most worth questioning. Mercer nodded slowly. The IG interview is tomorrow at 0900, he said. After that, the standing down period. 2 weeks, minimum. And after that, he stood up. We'll see what the investigation produces, and we'll see what the next intelligence picture looks like. He started down the corridor, then stopped. The team's running a debrief dinner tonight. Webb's cooking something he's been planning since Bagram. You should be there. He walked away. She stayed in the corridor for another minute, listening to the wind. Webb's dinner turned out to be a chili that had clearly been designed in advance with more thought than most operational plans received. 3 kinds of dried pepper he'd apparently been carrying in his kit for the better part of 2 months, waiting for a post-mission occasion worthy of them. It was aggressively spiced and genuinely good, and the table was louder than any meal Maya had attended since her arrival. Huang told a story about a training exercise gone wrong that involved a wrong grid truck, a goat, and a very confused local official, and the story got progressively less accurate with each interjection from Crawford and Barrett, who had apparently both been there and disagreed on nearly every detail. Voss ate her chili and watched the argument with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had been present and was content to let the record remain disputed. Maya sat at the middle of the table this time, not the end near the door. Nobody had directed her there. She just found herself in the middle when she sat down, and nobody moved, and the table arranged itself around that fact the way tables do when the arrangement reflects something that has already shifted in the room. Barrett, seated across from her, looked up at one point during the Huang story and caught her eye, and he had an expression she hadn't seen from him before. Not the hostile skepticism of the early days, not the careful recalibration of the post-Korvac period. Something simpler. A recognition. She looked back at her chili. After dinner, when most of the team had dispersed, Crawford stayed at the table running his tablet, and Maya stayed with a second cup of coffee she didn't particularly need, but wasn't ready to leave yet. I pulled Hartwell's access log going back 14 months, Crawford said, not looking up from the tablet. He reviewed every Iron Wolf after action report within 48 hours of submission, every planning document within 24. He turned the tablet so she could see the log. That's not abnormal for his role. Except for this. He pointed to a cluster of access entries. These 7 documents, he accessed them outside business hours, on a personal access credential rather than his command credential. Small difference. Easy to miss. But you found it, she said. I was looking for it. He pulled the tablet back. The IG is going to find it too, now that they know where to look. He closed the cover on the tablet. What he gave Volkov wasn't just mission specifics. It was 12 months of behavioral and tactical data on this unit, patrol habits, response patterns, how we handle compromise, how our overwatch positions and breaks. He gave him Staff Sergeant Reeves' profile, Maya said. Crawford was quiet for a moment. Yeah, he said, he did. And Volkov built an entire operational sequence around it. Korvac wasn't an attempt to stop us. It was a data collection exercise. And Foxhole was going to be the application, Crawford said. Except the profile was wrong. She turned the coffee cup in her hands. Reeve, she said. 4 years on this team, Crawford said. Good operator, quiet, kept to himself mostly. What happened? Crawford looked at the table. Ambush. Different operation, different mountain range. Overwatch position was compromised. We never fully understood how. He didn't make it back to the extraction point. He paused. Now we have a better understanding of how. The table was quiet between them. He deserves to be in the investigation record, Maya said. He will be, Crawford said. Carver's people are already looking at the timeline. He picked up his tablet and stood. Get some sleep. Tomorrow's interview is going to be long. He left. She finished the coffee. But the JAG interview ran 3.5 hours, which was longer than the IG session, and covered ground that was sometimes uncomfortable in exactly the way Mercer had predicted. The legal officer, Major Denton, precise and methodical in the way of someone trained to find the gap between what happened and what was permissible, walked her through the rock-face engagement 3 times from 3 different entry points. He was not hostile, he was thorough. There was a difference, and she reminded herself of it during the stretches that were hardest to sit through. At the moment you left the firing position, he said, for the 3rd time, you had not yet confirmed that the individual above you was armed. The sound I identified was consistent with a boot on rock in a controlled placement pattern, she said. At 8 meters, at 0.31 phen-hours, on a ridge that had no legitimate personnel traffic, there was no scenario in which an unarmed individual was approaching my position from above in that manner. But you didn't confirm the weapon visually before initiating the engagement. Visual confirmation at 4 seconds in closing, in darkness, from below, against a figure above the ridgeline. The confirmation window closed before it opened, she said. The engagement was initiated on threat assessment, not confirmed identification. And the threat assessment was everything I just described, she said, combined with the fact that 6 pre-positioned fighters had already been confirmed at the false position, which meant a coordinated operation was already in progress, which meant an individual approaching my position from above at that hour was almost certainly part of that operation. Denton wrote something, wrote more. She watched his pen move. Almost certainly, he said. That's the honest qualifier, she said. I'm not going to tell you I was 100% certain. I was certain enough to act and accept the consequence of being wrong, because the consequence of hesitating if I was right was worse and irreversible. Denton put the pen down. He looked at her. You've thought about this. I thought about it the moment it happened, she said. I've been thinking about it since. He picked the pen back up. Walk me through the 11 seconds between the engagement and returning to the firing position. She walked him through it. He wrote for a while after she finished. One more question, he said, off the formal record. He looked up. Your father was David Rhodes. She met it. Yes. I've seen his service record and his competition record. He paused. He was exceptional. Yes, she said. Do you think he would have handled the rock-face engagement the same way? She thought about it honestly, which meant she thought about it for longer than a reflexive answer would have taken. I don't know, she said. He might have found a way to confirm before engaging. He was better at slowing down than I am. She paused. But he also told me that the most dangerous moment in any operation is the one where you're deciding whether to commit, because hesitation and action both have costs, and only one of them feels like a choice. Denton nodded, closed his notebook. Thank you, Lieutenant, he said. We'll be in touch. The 2 weeks of stand-down had a texture unlike anything Maya had experienced in the camp's operational rhythm. The days were structured: equipment review, physical training, range maintenance, the administrative requirements of 2 formal investigations running simultaneously. But the absence of operational pressure created a kind of open space in the schedule that she didn't immediately know what to do with. She filled it with the range. Kowalski ran the sessions with her every morning, and they developed, over those 2 weeks, a working dynamic that had almost nothing to do with instruction and almost everything to do with the particular conversation that happens between 2 people who understand a shared discipline at similar depths. He'd been a designated marksman for 18 years before his knees took him off the field rotation. He knew things about long-range shooting in mountain environments that weren't in any manual, and he offered them the way competent people offer things. Not as lectures, but as observations, dropped into the practical context of whatever she was working on. On the 9th day of stand-down, Barrett appeared at the range. Not to shoot. He sat in the observer position with a coffee and watched her work through a degraded conditions drill, shifting wind, variable targets, timed sequences. When she finished the last string and began the breakdown, he said, "How much of what you do is math, and how much is feel?" She thought about it. Depends on the time available. Given enough time, it's mostly math. Given 4 seconds, it's mostly feel that's been built on so much math that it looks like instinct. How do you build that? She looked at him. You want to improve your long-range capability. I'm a decent shot, he said. I'm not you. Nobody starts out anything, she said. You start with position. Everything else is downstream of position. He put his coffee down. Show me. She spent the next hour breaking down the fundamental elements of supported prone, not because Barrett didn't know them, but because knowing them and inhabiting them were different things, and she could see the difference in the way he'd been sitting at the observer position, carrying tension in his shoulders that had nowhere useful to go in a shooting context. When she corrected his shoulder position on the 3rd repetition and his next dry fire showed a marked reduction in muzzle movement, he was quiet for a moment. Huh, he said. Yeah, she said. They packed up in the late afternoon with the mountains going orange behind them and walking back to the main compound. Barrett said, I was wrong. Before the first mission, I was looking at your patches and your deployment count, and I decided what that meant before I watched you work. She kept walking. I know, she said. That's it? You're not going to... What do you want me to say? She said. That it didn't matter? It did. It always does. But you adjusted when the evidence changed. That's all anyone can do. She paused. Most people don't even do that. He walked beside her for a moment. Your father raised you right, he said. He raised me to shoot straight and think clearly and not confuse those two things with being right about everything else. She glanced at him. He was wrong about plenty of things. Like what? He thought I'd stay in competition shooting, she said. He thought the military would be a phase. Barrett was quiet for a moment. What did he think when you went operational? She looked at the compound entrance ahead of them. He died before I got the assignment, she said. He never knew. Barrett said nothing. They walked the last 30 meters to the compound entrance in silence, and it was not an uncomfortable silence. It was the kind that forms between people who have been through enough together that they don't need to fill every space with words. At the entrance, Crawford was waiting, and his expression told her something had happened before he opened his mouth. Investigation result came in, he said. She stopped. Hartwell? Formal charges filed an hour ago. The IG found the personal credential access pattern, 3 separate incidents of unauthorized document transfer, and a financial trail that goes back 19 months. Crawford held the door open. He's in custody. His access to all regional command systems has been revoked. He paused. They also found 2 additional compromise points in the access chain. Junior staff members who didn't know what they were facilitating but were passing documentation through Hartwell's shadow system. A network, she said. A small one. But yes. Crawford looked at her steadily, and they've reopened the file on Staff Sergeant Reeves' last operation. The evening air came through the open door, cold and sharp with the smell of the mountains. Good, she said. She walked inside. Behind her, the mountains held the last of the light for another few minutes before the dark came down from the peaks and covered them. And in the operations center, the transcript of 2 investigations sat in a document queue, waiting for the signatures that would make them permanent record. And in a secure facility, 200 kilometers west, a man who had spent 14 months building a trap around a profile that didn't fit sat in a holding room and reconsidered the precision of his calculations. And in a corridor of the same facility, another man was processing the end of a career he had spent 22 years constructing and had spent 19 months quietly dismantling. Maya went to find Mercer. There was still work to do before any of it was finished. Mercer was in the operations center with the lights turned low, standing at the map table with a coffee that had gone cold and a look on his face that meant he'd been standing there long enough for the coffee to go cold and hadn't noticed. He had the foxhole satellite overlay on the table alongside a second image Maya hadn't seen before, a broader regional map with 3 locations marked in red grease pencil, connected by lines that suggested a network rather than individual incidents. She stopped at the table across from him. Volkov's network, she said. What's left of it? He pushed the regional map toward her. The intelligence from the facility gave Crawford's team enough to identify 2 active nodes we didn't know existed. One in the Eastern Valley system, one closer, here. He tapped a location that was less than 90 kilometers from Camp Sentinel. They've been running logistics support for the network, not operations. Supply and communication relay. She studied the map. The 90-kilometer location was a small settlement, agricultural on the surface, the kind of place that appeared in regional surveys as a handful of structures and a seasonal road. When did this come in? 2 hours ago. Crawford's still building the picture. He picked up the cold coffee, looked at it, set it down without drinking it. The investigation team wants a full operational review before we're cleared for tasking. That's going to take time. How much time? Weeks. Maybe more. He looked at the map. The 2 nodes won't stay where they are. She understood what he wasn't saying. The intelligence had a shelf life. Every day the investigation ran, the remaining network had time to disperse, relocate, rebuild under a different structure with different contacts and different communication protocols. By the time Iron Wolf was cleared and operational again, the picture Crawford was currently building could be obsolete. There's nothing we can do about that right now, she said. Mercer looked at her. No, he said. There isn't. He said it with the controlled flatness of a man who has accepted an operational reality he dislikes and is not going to waste energy on the disliking. What I can do is make sure that when we go back out, this team is better than it was going in. We were pretty good going in, she said. We were compromised going in and we succeeded anyway, he said. That's not the same thing. He finally picked up the cold coffee and drank it. I'm assigning you the Overwatch training program for the stand-down period. Full curriculum. Barrett, Huang, Webb as secondary shooters. They all have long-range capability that's been underdeveloped because we've had a dedicated Overwatch position. That changes. He set the cup down. If we ever lose Overwatch again, I want 3 other people on this team who can cover the gap. She looked at him. You want me to run the program? You are the program, he said. Everything you know, everything your father gave you, everything you've built on top of it, I want it transferable. Not perfectly. You can't replicate 12,000 hours in 2 weeks. But I want the foundation in place. He paused. Can you do that? She thought about what it meant to take something that had lived inside her as long as she could remember. Her father's voice, the range hours, the cold mornings, and the wind calculations and the particular discipline of reducing the world to a single point of contact and translate it into something teachable. Yes, she said. He nodded. Start tomorrow. She turned to go. Rhodes. She stopped. The IG included a commendation in their preliminary report, he said. For the false position operation. It's going into your service record. He paused. Hartwell's formal complaint against your foxhole engagement is going to be dismissed as part of the investigation finding. It'll be expunged. She turned back. I didn't know he'd filed it formally, she said. He filed it the morning after Foxhole, before he knew the investigation was coming for him. Mercer's expression was even. It didn't go anywhere because by the time it landed in the review queue, the IG had already frozen his authority. But it existed. He held her look. Now it won't. She stood with that for a moment. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me. You built the case that made it irrelevant. He picked up the regional map and rolled it. Get some sleep. You've got a training program to design. Well, she didn't sleep immediately. She went to the range in the dark. Not to shoot, just to sit in the observer position with her back against the sandbagged wall and the mountains visible above the range's northern berm in the moonlight. The cold was sharp and clean, and she let it be what it was without fighting it. She thought about her father, not the lessons, not the range hours or the competition stages or the voice that had been running in the back of her head since Korvac. She thought about the man, the particular combination of rigor and patience and occasional infuriating certainty that had characterized him as a person rather than as an instructor. He had been difficult to know well. He had communicated most fluently through demonstration rather than language, which was a trait she had inherited completely and recognized in herself only when she saw it reflected in other people's reactions. He had never told her he was proud of her. He'd shown her a better grip technique the first time she'd beaten him in a formal competition stage, which at the time had felt like withholding, and in retrospect felt like the most accurate expression of love available to a man whose primary language was precision. She missed him with a specificity that still surprised her sometimes. Not the broad grief of absence, but the narrow, sudden grief of a particular detail. The way he'd timed his trigger pull with his exhale, and not with his heartbeat, which was counterintuitive and correct. The way he'd marked wind with a blade of grass instead of a kestrel when they were in the field, because he said instruments made you lazy about reading what was already there. She pulled the folded photograph from her chest pocket and held it without opening it. She didn't need to open it. She had the image. She sat with him for a while in the dark and the cold, and then she put the photograph away and went back inside to write the training curriculum. The training program ran for 11 days. She built it the way her father had built things. From the foundation up, no shortcuts, no skipping the parts that felt elementary because the elementary parts were where most errors originated. Position first, then natural point of aim, then breath control and trigger discipline. Then reading wind, which she taught partly from theory and partly from standing at the range berm with Barrett and Huang and Webb, and making them watch a piece of surveyor's tape she'd tied to a stake for 20 minutes before they shot anything. "You're reading the tape," Huang said on the second day, watching it move. "I'm reading the air," she said. "The tape is just showing me what the air is already doing." Webb, who had the steadiest hands on the team by virtue of his medical work, took to the fundamentals faster than the others, but struggled with the patience component, the ability to hold a position without moving through the extended waits that real Overwatch required. She put him through a series of extended holds that started at 20 minutes and worked toward 90, and she sat beside him during the longest ones, not coaching, but just present, which was sometimes what patience required. Barrett was the most interesting case. He had real mechanical ability. His fundamentals were solid, his trigger discipline better than he'd given himself credit for. What he lacked was the specific cognitive habit of continuous environmental recalculation, the background process that good long-range shooters ran constantly, updating the firing solution as conditions changed without consciously interrupting the main task of watching and waiting. She couldn't teach that directly. You couldn't instruct someone into a cognitive habit. You could only create conditions where the habit became necessary and let the person's mind build it. She designed a series of exercises where the wind condition changed between the time she called the solution and the time the shooter fired, requiring continuous adjustment rather than a single calculation. Barrett failed the first 4 attempts, fired on the original solution rather than the updated one. On the 5th attempt, she saw the moment it clicked, a small shift in his posture at the firing position, a fractional pause before trigger pull that meant he was checking rather than executing. The round hit 3 centimeters from center at 800 meters in a changing crosswind. "That's it," she said. He ejected the casing and looked at the target through his scope. "That felt different." "It is different," she said. "You were shooting the conditions, not the calculation." He turned his head slightly, not quite looking at her. "That what your father called it?" "He called it listening to the shot before you take it," she said. "I never fully understood what he meant until I'd done it enough times that I understood it from the inside." Barrett looked downrange for a moment. "How old were you when you started?" 16. "First time you really got it?" She thought about it. 19. "Winter qualifier, outdoor range, 40-kilometer-per-hour gusts. I stopped trying to calculate and started trying to read, and the shot went where I needed it to go." She paused. "My father watched the whole thing and then told me my follow-through needed work." Barrett made a sound that was very nearly a laugh. "Sounds right," he said. The investigation concluded formally on the 14th day of stand-down. The findings were delivered to Camp Sentinel via secure document, and Mercer briefed the team in the operations center on a Thursday afternoon with flat light coming through the narrow windows and everyone seated around the main table in the particular attentive quiet of people who know what they're about to hear matters. Colonel Hartwell had been formally charged on 7 counts, including unauthorized disclosure of classified operational material, conduct unbecoming, and accessory to conspiracy resulting in the death of a service member. The last charge tied directly to the reopened investigation of Staff Sergeant Reeves' final operation. The financial trail Crawford had identified connected Hartwell to a network of payments routed through 3 shell companies over 19 months. The 2 junior staff members who had facilitated document transfer had been charged as well, though at a lesser level of culpability. Volkov's formal processing was an agency matter and Mercer had limited visibility into it, but Crawford had enough contacts to know that the intelligence from the Foxhole facility had produced actionable leads that 3 other operations across 2 countries were currently running against. The network isn't dead, Mercer said, but its command structure is gone, its logistics chain has been severed in at least 4 places, and it's operating without the intelligence advantage it's had for the past 19 months. He looked around the table. That's the result of this unit's work. Both operations, every person in this room. He paused. Staff Sergeant Reeve is being recommended for a posthumous decoration based on the reopened investigation findings. His family has been notified. He let that sit for a moment. I'd ask that you each take a moment to remember that the outcome we're sitting in front of today was built on ground that cost him. That doesn't go away because we're on the other side of it. The room was quiet in a particular way. Huang was looking at the table. Webb had his hands flat on its surface. Crawford had his eyes on the window. Barrett was looking at the middle distance with an expression that was contained and private and recognizably grief-adjacent, and Maya understood from it that he had known Reeve better than the personnel file would indicate. She didn't say anything, neither did anyone else. Mercer gave it the time it needed. Then he moved to the next item. Iron Wolf is cleared for operational tasking effective 48 hours from now, he said. Crawford's team has a current intelligence picture on the 2 remaining network nodes. We'll run the planning cycle starting tomorrow morning. He looked around the room one more time. Questions? Nobody had questions. Dismissed, he said. What? The team filed out. Barrett was the last one moving, and at the door he stopped and looked back at Mercer. Reeve, he said. Just the name. Mercer met it. I know, he said. Barrett nodded once and left. Maya stayed. She wasn't sure why. Not a decision exactly, more the absence of an impulse to move yet. Mercer was gathering his papers. You knew him well, she said. Not Barrett. Reeve. Mercer stacked the papers without hurrying. He was on this team for 4 years. You know someone for 4 years in an environment like this, you know them pretty well. He set the stack aside. He was the kind of operator who made everyone around him better without making it obvious that was what he was doing, quiet capability. You only saw the full shape of it in his absence. She thought about that. That's a hard thing to replace, she said. It is, Mercer said. He looked at her with an evenness that was not without feeling. Which is why I want to be clear about something. You are not a replacement for Reeve. You're not filling a vacancy. You're a different person with a different capability set operating in a position that happens to be the same role. He paused. I should have said that earlier. I'm saying it now. She held his look. Okay, she said. The team doesn't see a vacancy anymore, he said. I want to make sure you know that. She nodded. Get some rest, he said. Planning cycle starts at 0800 BAB. She found Barrett at the range. Not shooting, sitting in the observer position, same place she'd sat 2 nights ago in the dark. He had no coffee, no equipment, nothing in his hands. He was just looking at the mountains. She sat down in the second chair without asking. They sat for a while. 4 years, she said eventually. 4 years, he said. He was better than me at 3 things I thought I was good at, and he never once pointed that out. He looked at the mountains. He was planning to get out after this rotation, had a thing going with someone back home, was going to open a guide business, hunting and fishing, the whole thing. He was quiet for a moment. He would have been good at it. Yeah, she said. She didn't know that, but she believed it. The family, Barrett said. He's got a sister in Colorado, parents still alive. He stopped. I wrote a letter after he died. Never sent it. Why not? He thought about it. Didn't know what to say that wasn't either too much or not enough. He paused. Still don't. Say the true thing, she said. Even if it's small. Especially if it's small. She looked at the rock line above the berm. My father's colleagues sent letters after he died. Most of them were formal and careful, and I don't remember a single sentence from any of them. One of them, a man I'd never met, sent a card that said my father had corrected his grip technique at a regional qualifier in 2004, and he'd never shot below his best since. That's the one I remember. Barrett was quiet for a moment. A true thing, he said. Yeah. He nodded slowly. The mountain light was shifting, the late afternoon compression where everything went briefly gold before the cold shadow took it. "I'll send the letter," he said. They sat until the shadow came. Ito. The operational planning cycle for the 2 remaining nodes ran 4 days. Crawford's intelligence picture had sharpened considerably. The Eastern Valley node had reduced its communication traffic, which meant either they'd identified the compromise or they were rotating protocols on a regular schedule. Either way, the window was narrowing. The closer node, the agricultural settlement, was still active. Iron Wolf planned a 2-stage operation, the settlement first, then the Eastern Valley node, sequenced 48 hours apart to prevent the second from receiving warning from the first. Mercer's planning was meticulous, and Maya contributed to it differently than she had to either Korvac or Foxhole, not just as the Overwatch element, but as a full contributor to the breach sequence planning, the contingency mapping, the terrain analysis. Nobody commented on the difference. It was simply how the planning session ran. On the 3rd day of planning, Voss arrived at the map table with a cup of coffee for Maya without being asked, set it down without looking at her, and went back to the demolition schematic she was working on. It was a small thing. It was not a small thing. The training sessions had continued through the planning cycle, shorter now, maintenance rather than foundation building, but Barrett and Huang and Webb came every morning and Maya ran them through condition-variable drills until the planning day started. Kowalski observed sometimes. On the last morning before the operation, he stayed after the others left and ran a final series with her. Just the 2 of them, the way it had been on those early mornings before Korvac. He didn't speak much. At the end of the session, breaking down positions side by side, he said, "Your father would have called this a good deployment." She handed him the bipod case. "He'd have found something to correct," she said. "Yeah." Kowalski took the case. "But he'd have found a lot less than he expected to." She picked up the rifle case. "That's high praise," she said. "From him, it is." The settlement operation ran clean. Clean did not mean without incident. There was a moment in the approach where the Eastern Perimeter Guard deviated from the observed patrol pattern in a way that required Maya to hold Iron Wolf's advance for 4 minutes, while the Guard completed an unscheduled loop, and there was a brief, intense exchange inside the main relay structure that put Barrett against a wall with a cut across his forearm that Webb sealed on the extraction helicopter with butterfly strips and profanity in approximately equal measure. But the node was dismantled, the communication equipment destroyed. 3 operators of the relay network in custody. Documentation that Crawford began processing before the helicopter had landed. 47 hours later, Iron Wolf inserted against the Eastern Valley node. Maya chose a primary position she'd identified in the terrain analysis, a natural rock formation that required a more difficult approach than the obvious alternative, but gave her a firing angle that covered all 3 of the node's external personnel positions simultaneously. She'd spent an hour with Crawford's aerial imagery choosing between it and the easier option, and she'd chosen it because the easier option was too obvious, and she had learned something about obvious. The Eastern Valley operation lasted 31 minutes from first contact to extraction. No casualties. 2 of Volkov's remaining senior network coordinators in custody. The network's last active communication relay, permanently dark. On the helicopter back, Crawford pulled up the signals monitoring interface on his tablet and ran a sweep of every frequency associated with the network across the past 14 months. Silence. He turned the tablet so Mercer could see it. Mercer looked at it for a long moment, then looked out the helicopter's side window at the mountains going dark below them. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. 3 weeks after the Eastern Valley operation, orders came through for a ceremony. It was not a large ceremony. No assembled battalion, no public venue, no photographers from official channels. It was held in the Camp Sentinel Operations Center on a Tuesday morning with the team standing in a rough semicircle and a brigadier general named Okafor, who had flown in from the regional command headquarters and who had the particular bearing of a senior officer who had once been an operator and had not entirely left that behind. He read the citation in full, which took 4 minutes, and it covered both operations and the intelligence operation that had led to Hartwell's prosecution and the dismantling of a network that had operated against special operations units in the region for the better part of 2 years. Then he pinned a decoration on Mercer's chest for operational command. He pinned one on Crawford for signals intelligence work. He pinned one on each member of Iron Wolf. When he reached Maya, he held her look for a moment before pinning the decoration. "I knew your father," he said, quietly enough that it was just between them. "He would not tell you himself, so I will. He showed up at my office unannounced in 2019 and spent 45 minutes telling me why I should approve his daughter's special operations assessment request." He paused. I had never met David Rhodes before that day, and he had no professional reason to believe I'd see him. He came anyway. She looked at him. "He never told me that," she said. "He wouldn't," Okafor said. "He was a difficult man to know, and a very easy man to underestimate." He finished pinning the decoration and stepped back. "Not unlike someone else I'm looking at." He moved to the next person. She stood straight and looked at the wall above the map table and did not blink for a long moment, because there are things that arrive when you are standing in formation in front of your team that require a specific kind of discipline to receive without breaking, and she had that discipline, and she used it, and it cost her something to use it, and that was fine. After the ceremony, Okafor spent 20 minutes in conversation with Mercer before his transport arrived. The team dispersed to the common areas. There was no formal reception, no catered event, just the organic gathering that happens when a group of people have been through something significant and find themselves in the same room afterward. Webb had made coffee, real coffee, not the burned standing variety. He'd been hoarding a bag of something from a market in Kabul for an occasion he'd described as worth it. It was worth it. Maya stood with a cup near the operations center entrance, and Barrett materialized beside her, which had become a recognizable pattern. He appeared at her elbow when he had something to say and couldn't quite open with it directly. She waited. "Okafor say something to you?" he said. "Yes." "You don't have to." "He knew my father," she said. "He said my father came to his office to advocate for my assessment application." She paused. "Without telling me." Barrett was quiet for a moment. "Sounds like something a father does," he said. "Sounds like something he would do specifically," she said. "Incapable of saying a thing directly, completely capable of doing it." She drank her coffee. "You okay?" Barrett said. "Yeah," she said. "I'm good." He nodded, drank his coffee. "You know the new guys coming in next rotation are going to have to go through your training program," Mercer told me. "You going to be harder on them than you were on us?" She considered it. "I'm going to be exactly as hard as they need me to be, which is a different number for every person." That's a very sniper answer. It's just an accurate answer. He looked at his coffee cup. "For what it's worth, I sent the letter." She looked at him. "Reeves' sister wrote back," he said. 3 pages. He was quiet for a moment. "She said the hunting guide business was already partly planned. He'd put a deposit on a property in Wyoming." He stopped. "She said it helped to know that people remembered the specific things." Maya nodded. "Good," she said. They stood with their coffee in the mountains outside and the sound of the team behind them. Huang's laugh, Webb defending the coffee against Crawford's skepticism, Voss saying something short and precise that ended the argument. And it was the sound of a unit that had been through the kind of pressure that either destroys the bonds between people or forges them into something that holds under weight. These had held. Not because everyone was good at communicating, or because the dynamics were simple, or because the road from Kowalski's skeptical silence and Barrett's folded arms to this room had been smooth. It had been none of those things. It had been hard and uncertain and sometimes wrong, and it had arrived here anyway, which was the only way anything real ever arrived anywhere. Kowalski found her at the range that afternoon. She wasn't scheduled. She just went because the range was where she thought best, and she had things to think about. She wasn't shooting. She was sitting in the observer chair with the rifle case beside her, looking at the mountains over the berm. He sat in the second chair. They watched the mountains. "New intake rotation in 3 weeks," he said. "I know. 2 designated marksmen in the group, both good on paper." "Paper's a start," she said. "You're going to have to figure out which one of them has what you have, and which one has what most people have," he said. "It's not the same thing, and the one who has what you have is going to be harder to teach because they already think they know." She looked at him sideways. "You're talking about me," she said, "when I arrived." "I'm talking about the incoming intake," he said, without changing his expression. "Pay attention." She turned back to the mountains. "My father never told me he was proud of me," she said. Kowalski said nothing. I found out today that he spent 45 minutes in a general officer's office advocating for my assessment application without ever mentioning it to me. She paused. I'm trying to figure out if that's the same thing. Kowalski was quiet for a moment. Your father communicated through what he did, he said. Not what he said. You know this about him. Yes. Then you already know the answer to your question. She sat with that. The mountains were going into shadow now, the peaks catching the last direct light while the valley below them darkened. She'd watched this transition dozens of times from this position, and it was never exactly the same. The light moved differently each evening, depending on cloud cover and atmospheric conditions. And if you watched it carefully, you saw something different in it every time. Her father had said something once, during a long evening on an outdoor range waiting out a wind change, that she hadn't fully understood at the time. The best shooters, he'd said, are not the ones who are most certain. They're the ones who are most honest about what they don't know and most disciplined about accounting for it. She thought he was talking about marksmanship. She understood now that he was talking about everything. The photograph had lived in her chest pocket through Korvac and Foxhole and everything between and after. She took it out that evening, sitting on her bunk in the barracks with the camp settling into its night rhythm around her. She unfolded it. Her father at the competition range, eye to scope. Everything about his posture expressing the things she'd spent her whole life trying to understand from the inside, and had only recently begun to feel she actually did. Not the technical elements, not the mechanics, but the underlying truth of them. You cannot control everything. You can only control yourself. And if you do that with sufficient precision, with sufficient honesty about your own limits, and sufficient discipline in accounting for them, the things you cannot control become smaller, and the space you occupy in the world becomes more true. She folded the photograph, put it back in her pocket. She had a training program to run in the morning. She had a team behind her and mountains ahead, and work to do that mattered in the specific way that work matters when you've arrived at it by surviving the alternative. She lay down on the bunk and was asleep before the camp's lights went to their nighttime minimum, and she did not dream, or if she did not remember it when she woke before the alarm and rose in the dark and dressed, and went to the range where the first thin light was touching the eastern peaks, and the air tasted like cold stone in high altitude, and the particular clarity that comes at the beginning of a day that hasn't yet been anything except possible. She opened the rifle case. She got to work. The hardest thing you will ever do is stand still in the moment when everything expects you to fall. And the only way to learn it is to be underestimated so completely, for so long, that standing still becomes the most natural thing in the world.